Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
This is the Finance Committee's second session today. We just finished briefing, so it's Wednesday, January 28th, and we will hear 10 bills. And we're going to start number 1 with Senate Bill 60, Fraud Prevention, Prevailing Wage, Living Wage, Prohibitions, Penalties, and Enforcement. So our state's attorney can come to the table with whoever he'd like to bring. Our next bill, number 2, will be Unemployment Insurance Confidentiality of Information. And then number 3, Individuals with Disabilities, Senate Bill 199. Number 4 is Senate Bill 22. Number 5 is Senate Bill 113. Number 6, Senate Bill 14. Number 7, Senate Bill 134. Number 8, Senate Bill 52. Number 9, Senate Bill 139. And number 10, Senate Bill 205.
It doesn't matter.
My apologies if you're last on the list, but somebody has to be. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General and Madam Comptroller and Madam Secretary.
Madam
Thank you
Chair,
all for being here.
just for clarification, this is the bill of the Department of Labor, and I'm here in support. So if it's okay with you and the committee, I'm going to defer to Secretary Wu.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Beidel, Vice Chair Hayes, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Portia Wu, Secretary of the Maryland Department of Labor, and I am also the chair of the Joint Enforcement Task Force on Workplace Fraud. I'm here today in support of Senate Bill 60. This legislation has its origins in the work of that task force, which Governor Moore reestablished in 2024. The task force takes a coordinated whole-of-government approach to addressing worker misclassification, and it's made up of the key enforcement agencies. That's why I'm so honored to be joined today by the Attorney General, the Comptroller, and of course, our Commissioner of Labor and Industry, Devki Virk. There are a number of other agencies that participate, including Workers' Compensation, SSTAT, and other key agencies. Over the past 2 years, the task force has focused on listening and learning. We convene members of the business community, workers and labor organizations, insurance experts, enforcement professionals, and representatives from our sister states. We have engaged directly with industry, including small businesses and workers most affected by workplace fraud. The task force has published 2 reports. The most recent one came out just this morning. We've sent a link to all of your staffs, and we have some paper copies as well. And that engagement in our report focused on some consistent themes. First of all, workplace fraud disadvantages and undercuts businesses that play by the rules. Businesses that misclassify cut costs by shifting the burden onto law-abiding businesses, onto workers, and to taxpayers. That means that responsible businesses simply can't compete when they are paying workers' compensation premiums, Social Security and Medicare taxes, and unemployment insurance, but their competitors are not. And I will say this is a theme we heard over and over from many small businesses saying, I started my business 40 years ago. I simply could not do that today. You're creating a race to the bottom with what we have in our industry. Second of all, workplace fraud strips workers of basic protections, minimum wage and overtime, sick and safe leave, workers' comp and unemployment insurance. And of course, workplace fraud harms the taxpayer. It means lost revenue that's needed to fund public services, infrastructure, and other protections. Responsible employers want clear rules and fair competition, and workers want the protections they are entitled to under the law. Everyone agrees that workplace fraud hurts both. The task force report that I referenced that we issued today spells out the prevalence of the problem. Some studies estimate that over 10% of Maryland's construction workforce was misclassified or paid off the books in 2023, leading to tens of millions of dollars lost in terms of premiums and taxes. That also translates to an average of over $10,000 of average lost wages per worker. We know from our own investigations the scale of the problem is significant. In the last year, labor and industry investigators interviewed over 3,000 workers and found over 500 to have been misclassified. So that's roughly 1 in 6 of the workers that we interviewed. Thanks to the support from the governor's budget and the General Assembly, we have received more personnel and resources for enforcement at Department of Labor. And thanks to the efforts of Commissioner Virk and her team and the coordinated efforts of all task force agencies, in the last fiscal year, agencies have identified over 7,000 misclassified workers, translating into more than $52 million in unreported taxable wages. SB 60 would address these shortcomings by restructuring incentives and enhancing enforcement. The solutions are informed by the work of our task force, and this bill does 4 things. First, it adds targeted enforcement tools to our workplace fraud law where current law has proven insufficient. Second, it improves coordination across state government so that complex violations across multiple laws can be addressed efficiently, and we can leverage the tremendous resources that we have in our sister agencies and the expertise that's there. Third, it ensures that meaningful consequences apply when employers repeatedly or willfully break the law. And fourth, it provides modest incentives to vulnerable workers to report workplace fraud. I want to elaborate briefly on the enhanced enforcement tools, which are really at the heart of this bill. SB 60 adds general contractor liability for violations of the Workplace Fraud Act. I want to underscore, because we've received some feedback that people are concerned about this provision, this is not a new or untested concept in Maryland law. General contractors are already responsible for compliance with other labor standards, including the wage payment and collection law. So they have systems in place to oversee subcontractors and verify compliance and manage risk. This simply aligns the Workplace Fraud Act with that existing framework. Other states and jurisdictions within our region also take this approach, imposing general contractor liability for a series of wage obligations. The bill also strengthens licensing consequences and debarment authority. These are important tools because they send a clear message. We can't allow employers who repeatedly or willfully violate our labor laws to do business as usual, particularly on publicly funded projects. These consequences will encourage corrective action, protect responsible employers from being underbid by bad actors, and ensure that public dollars are not directed to businesses that disregard the law. These provisions are about accountability and creating incentives to comply while preserving fairness and predictability for employers who are already doing the right thing. We believe that increasing accountability will increase overall compliance, and stronger tools and a durable partnership between our agencies will ensure reliable enforcement of labor laws, improve compliance, increase deterrence, and help ensure that Maryland remains a place where both workers and businesses can compete fairly and thrive. For these reasons, I respectfully request a favorable report on this bill. I will now turn it over to Attorney General Brown.
So I've been reminded, Secretary, thank you for your presentation. Everybody else on your panel has 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Bidle, members of the Finance Committee. For the record, I'm Anthony Brown, your Attorney General. I'm here to support Senate Bill 60 with amendments. I think the amendments are generally acceptable to the sponsor. The bill significantly strengthens Maryland's enforcement against workplace fraud. You've heard from the Secretary about the findings, some of the findings from the Joint Enforcement Task Force on Workplace Fraud, as laid out in the report. Task force agencies discovered 7,000 misclassified workers through enforcement actions. The fraud has deprived the state of over $36 million in unemployment contributions and $3.5 million in unpaid taxes. Workplace fraud, as the Secretary mentions, harms workers, it drains state revenues, and it disadvantages honest businesses. And I think that's important to understand. Honest businesses who want to compete fairly are competing at a disadvantage from those who would defraud the government and their workers. Secretary Wu has clearly explained the provisions of this bill, so I'd like to focus on the aspects most directly involving the Office of the Attorney General. First and foremost, the bill establishes coordinated enforcement between the Commissioner and my office. In those cases, where the Commissioner refers complex cases to my office, we gain subpoena authority and can bring civil actions under workplace fraud laws. Second, it expands the False Claims Act to cover unemployment insurance fraud. My office enforces the False Claims Act. So this coordinated enforcement framework is critical because violations currently fall through agency gaps. Under this bill, we can pursue sophisticated violators who've evaded accountability. Regarding the amendments, we need to amend it regarding the False Claims Act to ensure confidentiality in certain investigations that are enumerated in the bill. Second, I think this is housekeeping. We need to clarify the definition of claim under the Act. I think that's just a matter of simple cross-reference. And third, we need to remove unnecessary prescription of how agencies interact. Let's focus on authorities and not so much when and how agencies meet to coordinate. Thank you, Madam Chair. 'Cause 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 'c
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Finance Committee. For the record, Brooke Learman. I am honored to serve as the Comptroller of Maryland and a member of Maryland's Joint Enforcement Task Force on Workplace Fraud, working alongside the Department of Labor, the Attorney General, Workers' Comp Commission, and many other agencies. I see workplace fraud from two vantage points in my job, both as the revenue administrator and as a member of the Board of Public Works. As the state's revenue administrator, my office, of course, administers our tax system and collects billions of dollars to fund essential services, schools, roads, public safety, healthcare. When employers commit workplace fraud by misclassifying employees as independent contractors or paying workers off the books, they don't just harm workers, they rob the state of critical tax revenue. These bad actors evade withholding taxes, unemployment insurance contributions, and workers' comp premiums. As you heard, we last year in our assessments discovered over $3.6 million and assessed $3.6 million in unpaid tax penalties just last year. SB 60 addresses this problem head-on by prohibiting persons from knowingly making or using false records, and it recognizes, I think, this provision that large-scale fraud is not a victimless crime. It undermines the fiscal foundation of our state. Then, the Board of Public Works. I serve as one of 3 members there, and we have the responsibility of approving state contracts and managing state property. One of the most important tools at our disposal is the power to debar contractors who violate the law, so that we are not spending our tax dollars on people who are misclassifying workers and violating the laws that we have all agreed to. Debarment is essential to protecting taxpayers and tax dollars and ensuring that our state dollars go only to responsible businesses that play by the rules. When contractors commit wage theft, misclassify workers, or engage in other forms of workplace fraud, they gain an unfair competitive advantage over honest contractors who pay their workers fairly and comply with the law. For these reasons, I thank the Attorney General and Secretary Wu and Commissioner Virk for their leadership and partnership and urge a favorable report with amendments. Thank you.
Mr. Pye?
I am, Chair Beidel. Good afternoon, Chair Beidel, Vice Chair Hayes, and members of the committee. I'm Devki Virk, Commissioner of the Division of Labor and Industry within the Maryland Department of Labor. Labor and Industry's scope includes enforcement of the state's labor standards law generally, and it specifically includes enforcement of the Workplace Fraud Act. This administration's commitment and the commitment of all of the state's agencies involved in the Joint Enforcement Task Force to enforcement of our labor laws is strong. Speaking for labor and industry specifically, we shared some numbers in our recent briefing. Our increases in prevailing wage recovery have gone from about $200,000 in restitution on average in prior years to around $1 million in fiscal year 24 and 25. Our wage and hour recovery from $500,000 in FY22 to over $1 million in FY25. And in workplace fraud, this is a program that we rebuilt from scratch. We went from 0 misclassified workers found in FY23 to 199 in FY24 to 558 in FY25. We, all of our agencies, are on the right trajectory to address this problem. But as proud as we are of these results, the fact that we're seeing these kinds of increases shows, unfortunately, just how common these violations are. Commitment alone will not do the job. We need tools targeted at increasing the impact of the work that we all do, tools that will both deter violations and meaningfully address noncompliance. This bill includes these tools. In a time of scarce resources, it's all the more important to leverage the resources we already have responsibly and effectively. And it is also all the more important to ensure that workers in this state get everything that they have rightfully earned and that businesses see a fair playing field when they compete. Workplace fraud is unfair to everyone, and it leaves others to pick up the tab and shoulder the risks. Someone is always paying, whether that's law-abiding businesses, the uninsured employers fund for workers' comp, and of course, the workers themselves. The measures in this bill will help the state to move the needle on compliance by improving our ability to do the work. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I join my secretary and fellow panelists in urging a favorable report.
Thank you. You know, we heard a lot about the tax dollars to Maryland, but my concern is for the people that are truly employees that don't have workman's comp, they don't have unemployment, you know, maybe getting underpaid. I mean, I've seen it from an insurance standpoint when I insured some general contractors. But is in your bill, I was just asking counsel, in your bill, have you defined what an employee is and what an independent contractor is? It's in the code in several places, but what did you use in drafting your bill?
This bill does not change the scope of the framework that's already laid out in the Workplace Fraud Act, that the ABC test that has existed under Maryland law. So we don't change anything about that. I think what we recognize is that there do need to be more incentives for workers to come forward, and also to make sure the accountability flows through, right? So whether that's where a general contractor, there's nests of subs and subs on the job, or whether that's other consequences such as with licensing or public projects or other things. So it doesn't change the underlying basic framework that's in the law today.
It's actually in the code in several different places, and there's, I wouldn't say conflict, but there's different descriptions. So I guess I'm looking for what definition are you using for an employee and an independent contractor? Which part of the code do you refer to? You can get back to me.
It's referring to the Workplace Fraud Act itself. Like this is amending that part of the code, and we are not actually changing those provisions. I can find the line in the bill.
I need to find the definitions again, because it's in different places. It's not all in one place. I think Workman's Comp has one definition. That's right. And other parts of the code have other definitions.
There is definitely that problem that workplace fraud has its definition, but individual statutes do sometimes have slight variations. That's absolutely true.
We'll work on that. Thank you very much. Other questions? Senator Guile.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, everyone on the panel, for this bill and for your work on it. I know this continues to be a frustrating issue. And I was looking back at, we've had a number of bills on this very topic over the last couple of years. And I don't know if Secretary Wu or Commissioner Virk, we had a briefing at one point and some frustration about the enforcement and how many enforcement officials that you had. Where are we at right now as far as staffing goes?
I'm going to ask Commissioner Virk to speak to this. I do want to say, obviously, more staff is better. We recognize that the General Assembly has already supported, and the governor has supported some increases in staff, but I'll let the commissioner speak to it specifically at Labor and Industry.
Yes, thank you for that question, Senator Guile. We received 5 pins for workplace fraud enforcement specifically in the FY25 budget. And we have 7 authorized pins in that program right now who are investigative pins. We have an administrative pin as well as a interviewer translator position. So we have, increased substantially the number of staff that we are using to enforce that law.
Okay, so how many total people are on the field, I guess? How many total filled that are?
So we have multiple different programs with different budgets. So the Workplace Fraud Act is under a separate budget. For that budget, we have 7 authorized positions as investigators. For prevailing wage, I'm looking at my notes here, we have a total of 13 field staff plus 2 supervisors, one of whom is acting, and 1 admin for prevailing wage. And that's to enforce prevailing wage law, in over 800 public projects across the state.
Okay.
And with our regular wage and hour staff, we have 15 full-time investigators, 2 supervisors, and 1 admin. We received 5 pins in the FY24 budget for that work. Again, all of these are kind of separate buckets. We are obviously cross-training our staff to issue spot, but each one of these programs has its own docket.
Okay. Yeah, I just only because we've already have very good policy in the book. It's just the question of enforcement. I think that's where the rub has historically been. You're nodding your head in agreement. Yeah.
I am, and to some degree, enforcement is about the risk of detection, right? And it's about the consequence if in fact a violation is found. So those 2 things work together. You can increase staff, but if you don't increase consequences, those staff are not working as effectively as they could. Right? You can increase consequences, but if you keep the same number of staff, then they can't be in as many places as they should be. So it's a balance between the 2, and what we're trying to do in this bill is increase on the consequences side for violations of existing laws.
Okay,
if that makes sense.
thank you.
To leverage our staff.
And then, real quick, Mr. Attorney General, I know you had a bill last year on this topic too, where it would give you some authority for enforcement as well. That's in this bill? I know this bill does a number of different things, including giving you some authority. Is there anything else is something different as far as what the authority you would be given in that bill if we had passed it? Is it just kind of incorporate that into this?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
And I'm okay with that. In many ways, I could describe this as a compromise bill, in a sense, on that provision. This bill does not give the Office of the Attorney General what we asked for last year, which was independent authority that many states have given to their Office of the Attorney General, where in those states you see huge recoveries because of the tools available to the Office of the Attorney General to bring these actions. And you don't have to look much further than the District of Columbia. They're bringing in huge returns to workers and the District of Columbia. This is a great bill, though. It really does enhance what we're doing in the place of workplace fraud, and it really puts the legislature's kind of stamp of approval and values on that coordination that Secretary Wu spoke about. It gives my office, it does give my office a subpoena authority when I get the referrals from the commissioner. It requires that coordination with the commissioner. That was one of the concerns that the Department of Labor expressed last year. You know, too many doors of entry. I didn't share that concern, but they do. This sort of, focuses where it comes in through the commissioner, and the commissioner may refer to the Office of the Attorney General. And when the commissioner does, I have subpoena authority and the tools that I already have available to bring actions.
Can I add one thing to that? Sure. I think that that's important to remember too, because, and getting back to the staffing question, it's important to have that referral ability because right now, quite a bit of the discovery of misclassified workers hinges on the comptroller's ability to do withholding audits. And we don't have enough staff to do withholding audits. I mean, we are very, very under-resourced in terms of our auditing staff compared to the majority of states that exist, compared to a majority of states. And so it's really important that there be multiple ways for us to refer findings to the Attorney General, to elsewhere, to unearth some of this misclassification and fraud that's occurring.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. So, and I guess when it brings it all back to, at least for the Attorney General's office, are you going to have the sufficient number of staff in order to be able to enforce as well? Do you have sufficient attorney with the existing resources that you have if you do get these referrals?
I think the common refrain that you often hear in response, the more you give me, the more I can do, and I'm not asking for more resources this year. So yes, I have resources. I've got a small dedicated team that we established last year when we brought the bill, in sort of like laying the groundwork for the OAG if you had passed the bill to begin that work. So I do have an attorney and a non-attorney who work these issues. I can always sort of expand depending on the nature of the case, the value of the case, what it means to the workers, and I know the chair is rightly focused on workers, and also what it means for the state. So I've got the ability to use and expand some existing resources. Could I use more? I don't think anybody at this table would deny that
we had an agency here yesterday and said that they were good with whatever they had.
Really?
So, yeah. Go
These
talk to
are all-
ATCC.
All of these positions have a positive ROI. Just
Yep.
keep that in mind.
Yeah.
That's right.
No. And I mean, and this is just my last comment upon this, and I think for the comptroller's point, the Attorney General and the Department of Labor, like I think these are all really good, important policies, right? We just want to make sure that we're getting these actually enforced. If we're going to pass this, that there are sufficient resources to investigate when these, misclassifications occur, that these are actually being enforced. Otherwise it's just, whatever we pass here is not as good as the paper it's written on. So I appreciate you being here today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Mounts?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we've got a distinguished panel. I don't know which one to select, but I think, this is more of a policy question, and I believe it would probably go to the Department of Labor. It might go to General Brown. But so the bill creates liability for the general contractor, right, in these workplace fraud cases. With the general contractor, if there's no knowledge, how does a general contractor legally? How can you legally hold them liable for something that they don't have knowledge of, if that's an argument or a situation? Or would there be a requirement that the general contractor have knowledge in one of these cases?
Senator, I will start. I will admit, even though I am barred as an attorney, it's been a really long time since I've practiced. They have experts here in legal standards, so I will defer to them to follow on. I will say generally, however, we do have this regime, as I noted, of overall liability, right? In some cases, for example, in wages, right? If you're the general on the job, you're the one who bid the job. You are the one who priced it out and did all the subcontractor bids. So presumably you have committed in a contract to the standards that will be enforced, that you will comply with the law, that you will pay the wages for the work, and you have scoped that out. And so that's how the liability attends. I will say, maybe I'll turn it over to either the AG or Commissioner Virk to say more about the knowledge piece. But, I do think there is a reason, and there are regimes where we do hold, multiple layers of parties accountable for complying with the law.
I think Commissioner wants to speak up on that.
Yep. Thank you. I think the answer is that part of the point of this bill is to require general contractors to pay attention to these issues on their work sites. So it creates an incentive for them to have the knowledge to make sure that the subcontractors are complying with labor standards in exactly the same way that they do, say, on prevailing wage projects, to ensure that their subcontractors are paying the prevailing rates. They have an obligation to do that now. If their subs do not do that, they, the general contractors, are automatically liable by operation of law. So that is the case in that setting. That is also the case, as the Secretary alluded to, in sort of general wage theft under the Wage Payment and Collection Law as well. So this brings the Workplace Fraud Act into alignment with those.
And forgive me if I'm naive, but does the general contractor have the authority to go to the subcontractor and to demand that information?
I mean, first of all, I believe they should, certainly under the terms of the contract with the subcontractor, right? Like the subcontractor is, typically there would be a provision in a contract. I can't speak to every contract that would say, we will comply with Maryland state laws. We will pay the wages that are, we've promised to pay or that are required to be paid under prevailing wage or other provisions. So, I think it's well within a contractor's abilities to be able to get that information and to work with subs.
Well,
They set their contract terms.
okay. I know there's opposition testimony. I think that's going to be some of the arguments in the opposition testimony. I wanted to at least get an opportunity to do back and forth before, before the opposition panels come up. Thank you.
Exactly. If this were law, I think, that would be a way that general contractors would want to make sure that they can protect themselves, is to have that visibility and to ensure that everyone is falling in line and complying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Ellis?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, panelists, for this bill. I have a couple questions. The first one is kind of like, I look at the bill testimony on my computer, and most of the contracting groups are against this bill. And we talk about being business friendly in Maryland, and I know a lot of these folks, they're not operating a bad operation. I know you have bad players out there. So any discussions that you had with those groups as far as to see if you can find a middle ground? I mean, they were just, some of them totally against this bill, and of course, you're for it. So was there any discussions? I'll ask them, but if I ask them later, I won't have a chance to get your input.
Absolutely.
So I'm asking you now.
Absolutely.
So.
I mean, we have sat down, and I would say, I'll be so bold to say, I think we have a very cordial relationship with many of the associations that have submitted testimony in opposing this bill. We have sat down with them. We've had dialogue both last year and this year as the Attorney General's bill was moving forward about these issues. I will say we also had some special stakeholder sessions where we had individual businesses, and especially with a focus on small and minority contractors coming forward. We had roundtables, we had kind of online forums to get their input. And we did hear often that sort of what's happening now, especially in some areas like construction, is the structure of the field is becoming such that it is becoming very difficult for some of those smaller contractors to compete because of this problem of the race to the bottom. We acknowledge the concerns of the business associations, and of course we're open to continuing dialogue with them to figure out if there's some middle ground.
Yeah, thanks for that. Because even some of the subcontract groups are against the bill. The smaller contractors, minority contractors. So I'm trying to see from your perspective why even the smaller contractors will be against it.
I think everyone's out. I don't want to speak for those associations.
No,
They'll do so. But, of course, everyone is concerned about changes in the law and whether that greater accountability, what that might mean for them. I think we tried to take that into account, especially with some of the licensing provisions, recognizing we do have situations now where it's, sometimes a violation's found and people just pay as the cost of doing business and move on. And there's no consequence. And then for a law-abiding business, they're incredibly frustrated because that contractor is still on the books, still winning bids, and they're saying, well, they're not paying Social Security and all these things. I am paying it, but there's no way I can compete if that person's taken off the books.
Thank you. And there's one last question. Legislation out there I sponsored a few years ago that passed now law that allows us to kind of suspend or take away business for a certain time from the bad actors in the field, like labor brokers. Is there any enforcement in that area as far as individuals who were convicted of different fraud anywhere in the country to have their license suspended or revoked in Maryland?
There are currently some license revocation provisions, and actually I think Commissioner Burke might have some specific examples of like when we've seen fraud, sort of which license areas we've seen them in. This bill would strengthen some of those. As I said, we found that it's not, the current triggers aren't proving to be terribly effective. Commissioner, if you want to add.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator. I think the debarment statute, and actually the comptroller is probably the most knowledgeable person to speak to the current state of the statute, or the Attorney General. I believe that there are some provisions under which folks who have been convicted of particular kinds of crimes can be referred for debarment currently. What this does is two things in debarment. First, it allows Workplace Fraud Act violations, knowing Workplace Fraud Act violations, to be a ground for debarment. It's currently not a ground for debarment. And second, it allows, as Secretary Wu alluded to earlier, it strengthens the existing debarment provisions for labor standards violations so that repeated violations, for instance, may be a ground for debarment as well.
Thank you. Do you have any statistics on actions in that area, debarment?
So the Attorney General can talk about this too. There had been, I want to say, no debarment actions by the Board of Public Works for a decade. We just approved our first 3 debarments in the past month. And, we are looking to work with the Attorney General and the Department of Labor to make sure that we are moving those through more and more now. I think there's no excuse for allowing somebody who's been convicted of these crimes, who is, taking away, who is, violating these statutes, to be allowed to benefit from taxpayer dollars. Yep.
And so why do you think, in your opinion, haven't been more sooner? Is it availability of?
I think just wasn't a focus. And we said, the members of the Board of Public Works, we said, where is this? We need this to be a focus. The Attorney General has been working with us on that to bring it back to create a more streamlined process to make sure that his team can get the referrals, they can do the research, they can refer it to the Board of Public Works staff, and we can get it on the agenda.
Yeah, so if this bill passed, it'll give you more tools, and definitely everyone will be committed to ramp up the enforcement.
Yes.
To get the bad actors off the playing field.
Right. They have an unfair competitive advantage over folks who are doing the right thing, and they also shouldn't be benefiting from taxpayer dollars. So I feel really strongly about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I have nothing to add on that. We're working with the comptroller, working with agencies. A lot of it is kind of educating the departments, the various departments that have the contracts, where these contractors are engaged in conduct that now qualify for debarment, either by law or sometimes it's discretionary. So it's on the BPW's radar. It's on our radar. We've got to get it down on every department's radar so that we can, in fact, uncover, discover, and then debar those who need to be debarred.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, the fact that workplace fraud isn't something that you can be debarred for is, to me, it feels like an oversight of the general, that this is something we need to close and fix.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and pleasure to see all of you, and certainly appreciate the effort. Very important issue that does need to be addressed. But I just wanted to quickly visit, to Senator Moutz's point, the provision in here that extends the liability, and it reads, a general contractor on a project for construction services is subject to citation and jointly and severally liable for a violation of this subtitle that is committed by a subcontractor regardless of whether the subcontractor is in a direct contractual relationship with the general contractor. So I'm assuming this is flowing through subcontractors to sub-subs and then sub-sub-subs as you work your way down the chain. And I was curious with regard to this liability issue, to what degree is there an expectation that the general contractor would have knowledge or have access to knowledge with a subcontractor with whom they do not have a contractual relationship? So, and how they're to even have knowledge of subcontractors with whom they don't have a contractual relationship. So how do they know that this individual or this subcontractor is even exists if somehow the contract they have with their sub now has subcontracted, unbeknownst to the general contractor, with other subs beyond a contract with that subcontractor that says, you'll give me notice if you do this, but if that notice is not provided, now this general contractor is completely unaware of the existence of the subcontractor with whom they do not have a contractual relationship. Share with me how that works, if you would. How do you envision that? And do we do that elsewhere? You know, look, I know we have vicarious liability with regard to, you know, certain torts and liabilities between employers that assume that liability of an employee. But I'm trying to share with me where else we have this kind of relationship in law so that I have a better understanding of how this works. And then finally, is this piece a linchpin to this legislation? Is this the core piece of what this bill is about? I'm trying to get a handle on that as well.
So there's a lot in your question, so I'm
There
not sure
is.
that I'm going to answer every part of it, and others on the panel will. But one of the sort of gravamen of your question was, how do we ensure this happens, right? And how do we know that the general contractor can do it, and how do they do it? Well, the key provision is joint and several liability. That is the legislature saying, as a matter of policy, general contractor, you have to know. And you have to do the things so that you do know. And through contract terms, the Secretary referenced this, by contract terms, they can govern when contracts can be subbed and further subbed. And when you further sub, notice back to the general contractor. Through contract, they can put in disclosure and reporting and notice requirements. So all of this can be done. Now, does that mean that some subcontractor down the line is doing something that the general contractor doesn't know in this universe? Yes, that could happen. But as Secretary Wu mentioned, these provisions are already existing in other parts of the law, and we'll get you a list of those, because I don't know if anyone at the table can catalog that. We'll get you a list of those. So it's not creating anything new for general contractors. General contractors know what joint and several liability is. They know what it means in terms of, hey, this is now an obligation or responsibility that I have. So I've got to put into place the things that make sure that I do know, and that when I know, I know that it's according to the law, or I'm taking the appropriate actions to correct it. So that's what you're doing, you would be doing as a matter of policy, and general contractors would then have that responsibility. And I should say, and I'm not the tort law professor, vicarious liability, it's sort of like a horse with a different color, joint and several, and vicarious slightly different. So let's stay on the joint and several piece. You will find that in many places in the law.
I agree, but now, on the basis of your testimony just now, we are in fact applying this standard of joint and several liability to a general contractor, and I understand what that means. What I'm trying to get a handle on is that general contractor is in fact limited in its ability to have knowledge. In other words, I agree with you. Now the general contractor says, hey, subcontractor, if you sub, I need a list of everybody and I want to know what's going. What if that subcontractor simply doesn't follow the requirements of the contractor, the general contractor, who has this joint and several liability, this new responsibility, this liability, and doesn't even know, because they put it in their contract, that the subs are all supposed to do step A, step B, step C. But if the sub and a sub-sub fails to follow the four corners of the contract with the general contractor, we have now put that liability, that joint and several liability, on the general contractor. And I'm just trying to understand what are we doing to that general contractor in our effort, a legitimate, effort to ensure that we are, getting these contractors to comply with, our state law, very important. And to Senator Giles' point, enforcement is going to be a huge factor in all of this. But I'm just trying to grasp, is what we're doing putting a general contractor in an untenable position to enforce something they may not have the ability to enforce? And if I understand correctly, it sounds like there may be significant fines. Can they, and glancing through, they could potentially lose their license to do business in the state of Maryland? So I'm just trying to fully grasp, and I get it, I understand and appreciate the effort, but I just want to know, are we putting an undue burden that just simply can't be met on some of these general contractors?
Senator Kramer, first of all, I want to parse out the licensure consequences, because there are other standards there where it's willful, knowing, or repeated, or you've had a final order entered against you, but you failed to comply with the final order.
On the part of perhaps a sub that now is the general contractor, because they're assuming all that liability, joint and several.
So I think that's, the licensure provisions are separate from that, but we're happy to parse that out in greater detail. I think we shouldn't put all of them in one bucket. I do think, it's you said it's an untenable position. I think it's an accountable position. And right now, generals take on many risks, right? You have that risk now of a sub, maybe bringing people on who are not licensed to do the work they are supposed to be doing. They may be bringing on substandard materials. They may be bringing on people who are not able to work in this country. Like, there are all kinds of risks that are happening. And so, this changes the indemnification, relationship. It does change the relationship between subs and generals to really have these conversations up front and make sure that there are guardrails in place to avoid some of these problems. I think the issue is not having knowledge doesn't excuse breaking the law. So we need to figure out how to get at these sort of structural violations, which we're creating right now on work sites.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question is for Secretary Wu. How are you?
Nice to see you.
how many of the violations found have been knowing violations?
I'm going to have to turn that one to Commissioner Brooke.
Thank you, Senator. So far, only one of our citations in workplace fraud has been for a knowing violation. A knowing violation, that level of intent is a high bar, and we've only found it met in one case.
Thank you.
Senator Hershey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very interesting. I was going to go along the line of that same questioning. Commissioner Vick, one violation, is that what you said?
One knowing violation,
One
that's
known
correct.
violation. How many complaints?
Complaints, we get very few.
Why are we here?
Excuse me?
I'm wondering why we're here, to be honest. You've had very few complaints and only one knowing violation?
Well,
And we have to beef up enforcement for this?
right,
To catch who?
well, the very few complaints doesn't mean that we found very few violations, Senator. We found many violations. Our workplace fraud investigators go out to construction sites across the state. They identify and they research and they review materials, they talk with individuals, and we have found over 500 misclassified workers in just a single fiscal year. And that's with only 7 investigators. You know, you can see from the Joint Enforcement Task Force that misclassification is a far greater problem than that, you know, as found by UI, as found by, you know, workers' comp, as found obviously by the Comptroller's Office as well. And it's a practice that has harms across the state, Senator. So in terms of complaints, if what you are speaking of is, do workers come up to us and say, I was misclassified? The answer is we get very few of those. And that is, again, partly because many of the people who are misclassified are those who are particularly vulnerable and who are not in a position in the normal course to complain to us and may not even know what their correct classification is.
Right. So
But we do.
You're saying you have to go out and find the problems. The problems are not coming to you. You need to go out and search for them and find them, right?
I would put it as, in order for us to be proactive in enforcing the law, we need to be out there enforcing the law in the field because that is where the violations are happening.
So when you said there was only one knowing violation,
Correct.
that would mean that there's a lot of complaints and a lot of things that you looked for that were not found. Maybe people were making mistakes. Maybe things were being done without proper knowledge. Wouldn't maybe like an educational program be a lot better than beefing up enforcement and going out and doing all of this work that seems to cost a lot more money to go and figure out how to do?
Right. So I am glad you brought that up, Senator. One of the things that the task force really has focused on is trying to figure out how to get the word out to all of the business community in Maryland, particularly in the construction and landscaping sectors, about what the law is and how to comply with it. We have resources on our website. SSTAT has resources on its website that it has newly added. Everybody from the Maryland Insurance Administration to workers' comp to UI has educational materials that are linked to place, which is the Department of Assessments and Taxation, where businesses regularly come to file reports and to register. We have work to do in that area, don't get me wrong, but it's not because violations are not happening. It's because violations are happening that we need, and that are happening at a very high scale, that we need the kinds of tools here so that we can leverage the 7 investigators that we do have to do the work more effectively and use the state's resources more effectively.
Senator, also, I wanted to note that the commissioner is responding to the labor and industry number of identified misclassified workers. Obviously, we have other tools and other programs. The comptroller has her work on the tax side, on the unemployment insurance side. In the last fiscal year, we conducted over 1,800 audits that identified nearly 7,000 misclassified workers. So it is a significant scale of a problem. I will also just note that proving something to be knowing for a legal standard is really a pretty high bar. You have to prove that someone, there's proof that someone knew it. That doesn't mean others weren't aware of it or might have realized maybe something's not totally right. But I think part of the issue also is it's becoming a systemic problem. People are doing this as a matter of course. They do not meet the requirements for independent contractors that are set out in the law. It's just simply not the case, but it's becoming a regular business practice.
Yes, and I recognize that. And sometimes you have just a few bad apples that are creating most of the problem. But again, when you're looking at the number of complaints, the number of violations, it just appears that this is more of, hey, if we beef up enough and we get enough people, then we'll go catch more people type of thing. And I think it should be more, Maryland's, it's difficult enough to do business in this state. I mean, I think we can all recognize that. These types of things, we certainly don't want people, in state doing business unlawfully. But at the same time, I think, with a number of policies that we passed here in this committee, your department has done a very good job of educating them, whether it's been paid sick leave, whether it's been, where the minimum wage is and all different types of things. We found one of the best, actions to rectify these things is you educate your office, your department, educating employers. And, again, I would probably like to see that happen first here to make sure that, we really have a grasp on what this magnitude is of the problem, rather than just say, hey, if we find enough enforcement people, we'll find more violators. So
I think you have to do both, Senator, right? We spend a lot of time doing education in our compliance division, and but that doesn't mean that the companies who didn't pay the taxes just don't have to pay them, right? They have to pay them. We educate them. We try to make sure that folks in their industry continue complying. We spend a lot of time doing education, and I agree, it's really important. But I think it's also important to make sure that there are consequences, so that when there are bad actors or there are folks who are sort of willfully ignorant of the law, that they don't have that unfair advantage over the businesses that have taken the time to read the educational materials that we put out, to talk to the chambers of commerce, who tell them the laws, and all these industry groups. So these industry groups represent folks who are complying with the law. They do a good job of sharing that information. So, but I think right now what we're seeing is that it is becoming more rampant because, despite education, and we will continue to educate people, there isn't as much enforcement. And so when you have to decide, how to make sure you get that bid, and you can underbid by just changing, skirting the law a little bit, and you don't think you're going to get caught, maybe you do it. I don't know. I think you've got to do both.
Well, there are obviously a lot of things we could talk about with respect to bidding government contracts that I don't think this is the hearing for that. But Comptroller, I very much appreciate, and Secretary, your comments as well. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I will share later with the committee what I saw in insurance, and it's more rampant than you think, but I can show you some examples. Thank you all very much for your testimony. We are going to now bring up panel 2.
Thank you.
Donna Edwards, Greg Ackerman, Tom Clark, Jess Fields, and Sergio Bautista Reyes. So you each have 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'm Donna Edwards. I'm president of the Maryland State and D.C. AFL-CIO. You have our written testimony. I first want to thank the Secretary, the Attorney General, the Comptroller, and the Commissioner. They have worked together and been very committed to the focus of workplace fraud and that task force. I want to thank this committee for the work that you've done on previous bills and the conversation. And I want to simply say straight out, workplace fraud is stealing. It's stealing. It's nothing more than that. It robs the workers of earnings, and more importantly, as Madam Chair pointed out, it also robs them of the protection of numerous labor laws in the state. It robs all Maryland taxpayers because bad businesses are not paying their fair share of taxes. Therefore, we all have the bill to pay. And it also undercuts honest employers. And we believe that the wild majority of employers are good employers. This is about the bad actors. This is about the people who do undercut and steal from workers, steal from taxpayers, steal from the state. And I don't even think that opponents of this bill want to protect the very small majority of bad actors. And that's what we're asking for, is to have the protection for our good businesses and our workers that is needed in this state in order to prevent workplace fraud and people working an honest day and getting undercut. So for all of those reasons, we do ask that it requires more than a slap on the hand. If you've taken money from people's pockets and from taxpayers, please, we urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 60. Thank you.
Happy to go. Madam Chair and members of the committee, Greg Ackerman, I'm the president of the Baltimore DC Metro Building Trades, who represent the 28 construction trade unions in the region. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in this bill. You know, there are a lot of really great things about this bill, which we could go over, but I do want to make a full-throated defense in support of the general contractor and upper-tier contractor liability provisions. Those are so important. We work with construction workers. They come to us every day complaining about not getting paid. And without strong upper-tier contractor liability provisions, it's virtually impossible to get them their money back. A lot of times these workers who are getting exploited are working for these low-tier, undercapitalized businesses that when they're sued, and oftentimes we'll sue those, or those workers will sue those companies in states where they don't have strong upper-tier liability provisions. And they typically go out of business or find ways to quickly settle, and workers know that they have to accept a significantly smaller settlement, which ultimately disincentivizes them from coming forward. General contractors in the region are used to dealing with these provisions, and frankly, in Maryland, they've been used to dealing with them for a long time when it comes to wage payment. We're just adding several other provisions like misclassification that upper-tier contractors would be liable for. They have indemnity provisions, and I can count on basically less than one hand the number of times I've actually seen general contractors hold the bag for their subcontractors. In reality, what this does is it creates a mechanism whereby the workers are both pushing on the subcontractor that's exploiting them, and you also have the general contractors that are pushing on the subcontractor to settle. That is effectively what these upper-tier contractor liability provisions do, and having additional teeth in our misclassification law to bring in the upper-tier contractors. This isn't just the general contractor, right? This is the upper-tier contractor as well. If you're talking about subs of subs, that is absolutely critical to making sure these vulnerable immigrant workers who are exploited are getting their money back. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Tom, you want to go next?
I'll go.
Okay, let him go. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, Madam, and members of this committee for the opportunity to offer testimony on Senate Bill 60. My name is Sergio Bautista. I'm a council representative for the Eastern Atlantic States Regional Council of Carpenters. And I'm also a proud resident of Baltimore County. On behalf of the Carpenters Union, we fully support Senate Bill 60. I can also personally attest to how important it is to strengthen Maryland's wage theft laws as much as possible. Before I joined the Carpenters Union, I worked for several years for labor brokers. I was paid in cash or checks without any tax deductions. I never received actually overtime. But now, as a representative for the carpenters, I have the opportunity to speak to many construction workers who are victims of wage theft, just like I was. Just to give you a quick example, just recently I was talking to a group of workers performing concrete work or carpentry work for concrete. The contractor was paying the lowest rate on that prevailing wage project, even including the overtime. The workers were actually performing a lot of things, including iron work, carpenter work, even some of them operators. And what I'm trying to say is the contractors are always trying to find ways to cheat the workers. More important, the carpenters are supporting this bill because Enforce protects the integrity of public procurement, sustains career paths, jobs, and ensures public projects as built to high standards by properly trained workers. So the Carpenters Union are asking a favor of support for Senate Bill 60. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tom Clark. Excuse me. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. My name is Tom Clark. I represent the workers of IBEW Local 26. I'm here in full support of SB 60, a bill that would curb fraud prevention, protect the most vulnerable workers, penalize unscrupulous contractors, level the playing field for our honest Maryland contractors, and put more money in the state's depleted tax coffers. A recent report from Maryland's Joint Enforcement Task on Workplace Fraud discovered 5,500 workers were misclassified, and Maryland lost over $36 million in taxes and revenue. Although I care about that $36 million that Maryland lost, as do you, I worry more about the $120 that is missing from the paycheck of a Maryland worker who's trying to feed his or her family. I also worry about the honest Maryland-owned and operated contractors like Free State Electric, Mona, Arrow, and Burkhead Electric. SB 60 will aid these companies as they compete against companies that, like a certain Florida-based company, that has been repeatedly fined by the AG of the District of Columbia, yet the business model of worker misclassification and tax fraud goes uninterrupted in Maryland. The beauty of SB 60 is it puts the Maryland Department of Labor, the Comptroller, and the Attorney General on the same page as we try to combat worker misclassification. It not only implements fines, but it also may enforce debarment and license suspension on state-funded projects. SB 60 also enforces these penalties on general contractors who look the other way when their subs misrepresent their workforce. These tools, different workers for Maryland companies, and reduce the deficit that our state currently has. I appreciate the committee's time. I respectfully ask that you give a favorable report on SB 60. Thank you.
Thank you. And you must be Jesse Fields.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, the Finance Committee, the opportunity for me to testify on Senate Bill 60. My name is Jesse Fields. I'm an organizer with the Mid-Atlantic Pipe Trades Association. My responsibilities include visiting construction sites, talking with workers about their rights and industry standards. These conversations often reveal workers who are not being paid what they are owed and or being misclassified by their employer. When workers tell me that they aren't receiving their proper wages, I help them navigate the process of filling out complaints. Wage theft and misclassification is not an abstract problem. These are realities I encounter every day. Contractors who misclassified workers as independent contractors do so to avoid paying taxes to workers and overtime, shifting the burden to workers and law-abiding businesses. Without proper oversight and accountability, these practices will persist, undercutting honest contractors and denying workers the wages and the protections they are due. I urge you to please support this bill.
Thank you. Do I have any questions for this panel? I don't see any questions. Thank you all for your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have three more favorables: Amy Gallantley, Sally Dwork, and Christopher Cano.
Good afternoon, Chair Beidel and members of the committee. My name is Amy Gallantley, and I'm here from the Public Justice Center to support SB 60, which we think offers some modest but important improvements to Maryland's workplace fraud enforcement regime. At the Public Justice Center, we regularly hear from construction workers who continue to be misclassified as contractors, even though they're being treated like and therefore deserve the benefits of employees. It seems that many employers just factor the risks of being caught into the cost of doing business. Under the current framework, they may get sued or they may face investigation by the DOL, but in the meantime, they can save themselves a bundle in overtime wages and payroll taxes by continuing to misclassify their workers. SB 60 significantly raises the cost of knowingly violating the law because such bad actors would now lose their business license. This is related to what we call the revolving door LLC problem. We hear from our clients regularly that whenever their employers get into legal trouble, the owner just abandons that LLC and opens a new one. So our clients will just keep getting paid by the same guy from one week to the next. But this week their paycheck says 456 LLC on it instead of 123 LLC. SB 60 wisely foresees and prevents this shell game by ensuring that the revocation of a business license extends to any successor entity that has one or more of the same principals or officers. Another common bad practice we see is general contractors who outsource hiring or payroll to a labor broker and then try to hide behind the screen of the broker because we have this current standard that doesn't require that lets them pretend like if they don't know there was a problem, then there's no liability to them. SB 60 addresses this problem by creating joint and several liability for general contractors, which, as has been discussed, is not a new concept under Maryland law because it is the same standard that already exists under the wage payment and collection law. SB 60 simply extends this logic to the framework of the Workplace Fraud Act, which we think makes sense that general contractors should ensure compliance of all workplace laws. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Bidle, members of the committee. Thank you for having me. My name is Sally Dworak Fisher. I'm a senior staff attorney at the National Employment Law Project, otherwise known as NELP, also a Baltimore City resident and District 46. You have my written testimony outlining NELP's work and our particular expertise in independent contractor misclassification, which is called workplace fraud in Maryland, and effective policy solutions for it. NELP supports Maryland's continued efforts to end independent contractor misclassification and the policy recommendations in the Joint Enforcement Task Force, 3 of which are included in this bill. First, license revocation and debarment are effective tools to compel compliance because they impact the direct revenue streams of the violating businesses. SB 60 will add this tool to better ensure violations may be subject to more than just a simple monetary penalty that can be sometimes treated as just the cost of doing business. Second, general contractor liability will ensure that prime contractors have the incentive to know whether the subcontractors on their projects are complying with the law. You have just heard about the LLC whack-a-mole problem where judgment-proof LLCs subcontractors change names or go bankrupt or fold up to avoid accountability. Finally, allowing workers to receive a portion of the monetary penalties is a really important provision here because it will incentivize workers to come forward, and the workers are the ones on the ground with personal information of what's going on. Workers currently face significant obstacles to coming forward, particularly when they are on the job. Misclassifying employees as independent contractors, as you've heard, strips workers of bedrock employment and labor law protections. It erodes labor standards, and it creates a race to the bottom as law-abiding businesses struggle to compete. Because SB 60 provides modest but much-needed improvements to the Workplace Fraud Act, NELP urges a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Christopher?
Madam Chair, honorable members of the committee, good to be here. First time in front of the committee this session, which I'm sure will be many more that you'll be hearing from me on behalf of the members of SEIU Local 500 and those tens of thousands of members in this state working both the private and public sector. And we stand in solidarity with our labor brethren to ensure that wage fraud, to ensure that honest business is something that continues in Maryland and that the wage fraud is addressed in a meaningful way. You just had on the sponsor panel 3 high-profile members of the executive branch, and this is not the first time that this bill has been heard. I recall last year the same folks coming before and asking for the tools for enforcement that's necessary to ensure that the message is clear. Wage fraud will not be tolerated in Maryland, and that responsible employers should be uplifted and protected from those bad actors. And this bill does very significant things to do that, including covering significant unemployment insurance fraud, making sure that wage fraud cases can be used to provide direct restitution to the workers affected, and enhance the coordination of enforcement authority between the Commissioner of Labor and Industry and the Office of the Attorney General, strengthen penalties for worker misclassification, and ensuring that a portion of civil penalties is paid directly to harmed workers, and of course holding general contractors accountable for the violations committed by subcontractors, thus closing a loophole that has enabled widespread abuse. Too often, workers who are misclassified are underpaid and they face retaliation, long delays, or no meaningful remedy at all. And so, again, I urge a favorable report on this on behalf of the workers of the state of Maryland and those honest business owners who are doing right by their employees.
Thank you for your testimony. And I don't see any questions for this panel. Thank you very much. All right, so next I have a list of unfavorables. Michael Halloran, Kevin O'Keefe, Alex Austin, Michael Adams, who am I missing? Alex, is Alex Austin here? Okay, let's go. Sean Malone, Andrew Griffin, Grayson Wiggins, and last but not least, Troy Brown. You all have 2 minutes. Where would you like to start? Mike, you want to start?
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Senate Finance Committee. For the record, my name is Mike O'Halloran. I'm here today representing NFIB in Maryland in opposition to Senate Bill 60. I'm going to focus my comments on 3 particular points, and I'll certainly defer to my other colleagues to get into probably some of the finer points regarding prevailing wage and workplace fraud statutes. But I do want to draw the committee's attention to a couple of places in the bill, namely page 9, lines 8 through 16, and then again on page 19, lines 26 through 32. You heard a lot from the sponsor panel with regards to referencing cases to the Attorney General that may or could refer those cases. If you read this bill, particularly in those places, there is no discretion. And particularly troubling and egregious in these sections is the fact that the commissioner may very well investigate a case and then determine that there is no merit to this case. But under this bill, that case still gets referred to the Attorney General. And I have to tell you, from a small business perspective, that is very, very troubling. Because here I am, let's say I have a construction firm, and I've been under investigation for an alleged workplace fraud violation. Commissioner comes in and says, Mike, you didn't do anything wrong. Whew, I'm in the clear. No, I'm not. The Attorney General then comes in and investigates. The other part I'd like to point out is in the fiscal note, you'll notice that DLS actually disagrees with the department's assessment on the impact of small businesses, specifically with regards to the effect. Under current law, small businesses already have to come into compliance with regards to UI taxes, workers' comp premiums, payroll taxes, et cetera. But under this bill, they may also have their professional or occupational licenses suspended or revoked for non-compliance. So this really definitely does have an impact on small business. And just finally wrapping up, anecdotally speaking, a lot of small subcontractors want to be general contractors, but they tell me, NFIB members tell me, we don't want to be general contractors anymore because of things like this. So with that, I conclude and respectfully request unfavorable report.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. On behalf of MMCA, my name is Sean Malone. I'm testifying in opposition to Senate Bill 60. On behalf of MMCA and ABC 17 years ago, we actually sat with then Tom Perez and drafted the original worker misclassification bill. We worked through that bill with him because we agree with all the things that were said before us. These are problems in the workplace. However, over 17 years, 3 governors, several DOL secretaries, we're still the only industry really looked at under this. And despite that, the Department of Labor stats that they put out today, with an enhanced investigative team that visited 433 sites, they resulted in 30 citations. Over 93% of the visits resulted in no violation. Of the investigations pursued, a little over 10% resulted in a violation. There is not, our our industry is complying. And why are we complying? Because the current law has significant penalties to not comply. Fines from $1,000 per employee to $20,000 per employee for repeat offenders. Debarment because if you're violating misclassification, you're violating prevailing wage. And that GCs under the current law are required to get an affidavit from their subcontractors that say that they understand the law. We're providing evidence to who the violator is. These are not hard cases to make a willful knowing violation. Despite high compliance, DOL wants to subject general contractors to joint and several liability. But why would we do that? Under labor and employment law already, they are jointly and severally liable up to 3 times the unpaid wages, attorney's fees, and court costs for a subcontractor, regardless of whether they paid the subcontractor or they had a contract with them. This protection is already in place for the worker. The workers get paid, and that's the beauty of the current statute and the prevailing wage statute. GCs are doing their job and informing contractors. We're avoiding violations and providing evidence. There are other issues with this bill that we could address, but frankly, this is a poorly conceived, poorly drafted, and draconian bill. We urge an unfavorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Malone. Who's next? Grayson, can you go next? Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Grayson Wiggins here on behalf of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce. You're going to hear some specific points from my colleagues up here, so I just want to make a more broad statement. First, the Maryland Chamber of Commerce, we want every worker to be properly classified. We support that. But, and I think this goes to your earlier point, Madam Chair, is this is a complex legal issue and question that involves multiple tests across multiple statutes. There is a common law test in the courts, there's a federal test, and the Department of Labor has proposed really what is a new test in their recent family regulations. And so given that complex regulatory framework that we have created here in Maryland, we are concerned that the department is now coming forward with this bill, which creates really an investigatory quagmire. It exposes subcontractors and general contractors to exponential increases in liability, and it includes license revocation when you may not even have an idea or knowledge or involvement in what took place. And so dumping that on top of that complex regulatory framework is going to be is extremely concerning to the chamber. And I'm personally concerned, and I know the chamber is as well, that why does the department not come forward with a bill that streamlines the process, that makes it easier to comply, and that addresses an issue without this punitive measure that I think, to Senator Kramer's point, could ultimately end up in a situation where you have a subcontractor of a subcontractor of a subcontractor who makes an unknowing violation, and then the general contractor's license is revoked, potentially. How is that good and just and helpful to Maryland's businesses, workers, and economy? And certainly based on one knowing violation. I mean, we heard a lot of discussion up here about fraud. Been a while since I was in law school, but one of the elements of fraud was intent and knowledge. And so based on that one knowing violation, we have concern with that, the use of that phrase generally, and this bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Kevin?
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Bidle and members of the committee. My name's Kevin O'Keefe, representing the Independent Electrical Contractors Chesapeake. We represent 150 contractors. We have 1,300 apprentices, and we have about 9,000 employees. I want to point out we're against this bill for a few reasons that have been touched on. But the first, I want to follow up with what Mr. O'Halloran said. On page 9, 19, and 22, if the commissioner finds no merit in the charge, it's still referred to the Attorney General. To me, that almost seems like administrative law double jeopardy. And then if you go to page 6, 1/3 of the money for fines of $1,000 and $10,000 go to the employee. Now that to me seems like an incentive to sue. And then if you go to page 12, lines 12 to 15, there's only a hearing if somebody was mistakenly identified as the wrong contractor. So it doesn't seem to be a clear process for contractors to be able to defend their name. And then the other thing is, if they are reinstated, they have to pay a licensing fee to get their license back. So that also seems unfair. And I think, let's not forget, it's very hard to do business, be a business today. I think Senator Ellis talked about Maryland's business climate, or I think something like that. And it's hard because, you know, you're trying to get workers, you're still dealing with the effects of inflation. So this just creates more burdens. And there's also in this law that I don't think is good, is that the commissioner can sue on the behalf of employees. Now, who is suing on behalf of the employers who were unjustly accused and put through the ringer? So for those reasons and a few others, we hope you give us an unfavorable report.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Michael Adams on behalf of Associated Builders and Contractors. Associated Builders and Contractors has a number of practical and policy concerns regarding this bill. The one I wanted to use my time to focus on was the joint and several liability portion, and give a little bit of a legal analysis of what is being attempted in this bill. Traditionally, if you go to joint and several liability precedent, it usually falls into one of three categories: either parties acting in concert to cause a harm, actors acting independently to cause a single indivisible harm, or there is some sort of direct agency relationship between the actors that gets you to joint and several liability. As this bill is written, none of those things would apply here. So this would be an extension of what existing Maryland law is, with one exception that I'll get to. So what does that mean? Why is that a problem? It's a problem because of due process. A general contractor cannot defend itself against the actions of what is effectively complete legal stranger. This is especially important if you go to existing law. So under Labor and Employment 3908, it allows an unknowing violation to be cured without a penalty, and the contractor can move on. If you don't have any contractual relationship, if you don't have any ability to cure that harm, you're simply going along with a legal stranger, you're automatically into this higher tier of consequence. That's bad. Second, the way the law is currently written, a general contractor can be assigned penalties for knowing violation for someone they don't know exists. If they are jointly and severally liable, if they're eating all of it, they're eating those higher penalties for a knowing violation, with the basic premise that they didn't know that sub of a sub, which is very common on these job sites and is practically unworkable when those situations happen. There is an example in the law that was referenced repeatedly in the former panel regarding unpaid wages. That's, in my opinion, very different because there's a different policy goal there. There's also indemnification allowed within the law, even if there's not contractual privity. None of those protections are in this statute. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Andrew Griffin here on behalf of the Associated Utility Contractors of Maryland. That is an association of purely subcontractors who do underground utility work. I want to echo what the proponent said. Subcontractors who compete do not want to compete with people who are skirting the law, first and foremost, and I'm not here to defend that. I want to talk about what the impact of this bill is going to have on compliant subcontractors. So first, when you increase the liability on the general contractor, that liability flows downhill. If we're going to sit here and think that the general contractor is not going to increase bond requirements or insurance requirements on a four-person business who's nothing more than dump truck drivers, that's absolutely going to happen. Two, the prolonged investigations where the commissioner may find no merit in a claim, gets kicked to the attorney general. That costs someone money. They have to hire accountants. They have to hire attorneys to make sure that they're able to get through that investigation unscathed. They have to pay that twice. That's on a small business. The increased liability on generals, what I find interesting, I think it could create the unintended consequence that general contractors, we talk about creating small business in the state, they may retract in, and their scope of who they work with is going to become smaller, right? Because as we go down the line of the subs of the subs of the subs, how do I know that you are complying? It's going to be very difficult for someone to start a business and crack into that world to be successful as we increase liability on the generals. Finally, it was mentioned about granting additional authority to the commissioner to basically bring a class action lawsuit. Employees already have standing to bring suit when they've been harmed. And finally, I've sat in front of this committee on a lot of issues impacting business. something was mentioned in the proponent panel that I actually can't believe I heard. They said, well, when someone violates, we'll just sue the subcontractor. They'll go out of business, and then we'll go after the general. So I'm here representing subcontractors. We don't want to go out of business. We want to stay in business. We want to be successful, and we want to comply with the law. So that I will urge an unfavorable report and appreciate your time.
I see some questions, but we have one more person who didn't make it to the table, and that's Troy Brown. Would you stand at the podium for me, Troy? That way we can ask questions of all of you at once. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Senate Finance Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. I'm here on behalf of the American Subcontractors Association of Baltimore. We are strongly in support of the rights of subcontractors. And we oppose Senate Bill 60 for several reasons. The bill's payment withholding provisions are especially troubling in the construction context. I'm a partner in my law firm of Albers & Associates. I represent a number of subcontractors. And under many contractual provisions, there's a pay if paid or pay when paid provision for subcontractors. And that requires payment to be withheld when one contractor is found to be non-compliant. And that can create serious cash flow problems for subcontractors. As you guys can imagine, many of these companies are reliant on payment. And if they're not paid, they go out of business, plain and simple. And I've seen it happen. Our issues are not with the intent behind the bill, but the impact. And as already discussed, the joint and several liability component has many different problems associated with it. What's a good solution? Creating a carve-out or an exception for subcontractors who are clearly compliant. Why affect everyone when there is a minority of a problem? Thank you. We urge the committee to report unfavorably on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Troy, do you mind staying there? Are you
Not at all.
okay for questions? So Senator Hershey, one question to one person.
Oh, Madam Chair. Thank you, though. One question. Mr. Malone, I'll ask you a question. I had mentioned to Secretary about possibly looking at more of an educational program to try to resolve a lot of, well, some of the issues. It doesn't appear to be as much as they say as far as violations that they're actually able to investigate and find out. What do you know about, she mentioned that some of that was done. What do you know about the educational program? Is that, in your opinion, and you're representing all of the group up there, is that a better solution than going after what this bill tries to do?
Yeah, I mean, look, the Secretary's done a great job in improving enforcement, and we applaud that. Like we said, we supported the bill. But with 30 citations, they have over 400 site visits. They have one knowing violation,
Right.
which would indicate that 29 of the 30 that were issued citations didn't fully understand the law. So we can start to chip away that 5% who's a problem based on their numbers. These aren't my numbers, 6% maybe, with education.
Right.
Because there's already enforcement power in the statute, which is evidenced by the cases they started to make once they got their enforcement capability. We would love to see a bill that would help us educate. We work really hard. But by the way, general contractors on all these jobs, under the procurement bill that was passed last year and under the workplace fraud bill currently, have to get from their subcontractors a signed affidavit that they understand their obligations under the law, or they can be the presumption is that that subcontractor is an employee, and then they're held liable. So general contractors are already doing this education on their own. We could certainly use help from the state, less punitive measures, more support as far as educating contractors.
Okay, all right. And when we're looking at such a small fraction of the overall contractors and subcontractors that are involved in this, that might seem to be a much better solution than making it extremely more difficult to do business in Maryland. Even though we want to get the bad actors out, it's making it much more difficult from what it seems like on those that are operating correctly and know what they're doing as well, too. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A rhetorical question. If any of you represent the industry you're representing here at the table in other states or have information to talk about what other states in our region do on this, that would be very helpful to share with myself and the committee, because we're in competition and we need to grow our economy. And so we need to be careful about, we want to be sure people follow the law. We also need to be careful about imbalancing too much and losing opportunity. And then the 10% statistic was fun for me because I'm trying to get rid of our emissions testing program, and the failure rate of that is less than 10%, most of which is mechanical failure, not emissions failure. So sometimes we only have maybe 10% of an issue. I think we need to think about long and hard about the education side before we go super punitive. Could I just ask for you, sir? You talked about subcontractors, and this is my question for subcontractors. The lag time of getting paid is a huge issue with being in this industry.
Indeed.
And a lot of subs are small, woman minority owned, or somebody like just first generation business owner. What do you foresee if we put this in place that would lead to more problems with those subs getting the payment they need in a timely fashion?
Can you rephrase the question? I'm sorry.
Would this bill is going to, would this slow the process down even more now for payments going in a timely fashion? Or what kind of impediments do you see with these added provisions that could impact the subcontractors that you represent?
I can certainly see that being one of them. It may have a perverse incentive also. This could create another monitoring problem. There may be a disincentive for anybody to report non-compliant actors, and that, I think that would directly frustrate the intent of the bill. And I think that's a chief one among many. Again, certainly the idea of monitoring non-compliant actors is difficult. None of these subcontractors are set up for it. They don't have the financial capacity to do it. So quite frankly, I think that while the intent of the bill is laudable, I think the impact of it would not be in furtherance of the principle underlying it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And so listening intently to everyone's testimony, and I asked the sponsor panel the question, and you heard their answer about basically why most of all of the contractors are against this bill. I mean, did you all speak with the administration? And is there a problem in any bad actors in the entire group that maybe need some laws to really get them out of this space? I know in Charles County, my district, a few years ago, there was a contractor who had a contract, multi-million dollars, to renovate one of our schools. And some of the workers contacted some union folks, and they sued and got hundreds of thousands of dollars in back wages, unpaid wages for them. So that was adjudicated to court. So personally, I know that there are bad actors in every space, right? As a CPA, I mean, we have a lot of oversight over our CPAs in Maryland and in the country. And, you know, a lot of times you have people's license being suspended, license being revoked because of bad actors. You go back to way back to Arthur Anderson, the accounting firm in Enron, right? The entire firm was disbanded because they were so egregious in their malicious behavior. So we had police reform here in Annapolis, and I mean, because every profession, from my opinion, have some bad actors, right? And if we police them, in the military, same thing, right? You have bad actors. You police them, you kind of can kind of clean up the profession and have the profession well respected. Because 95%, I believe, in every profession are really great. People want to do a great job. And so speaking with the administration, they said they spoke to the industry, they brought you all to the table. I mean, why couldn't you all come to agreement where instead of just unfavorable we see here from all your testimony, well, maybe favorable with amendments, right? Change this, change that to get rid of some of the provisions in the bill that you don't like or find most egregious. I'm not sure who's the one person who can answer that. They pointed to Mr. Malone. So well, you choose who, if you want to address that
I mean,
issue.
look, we worked really hard on this bill when it first came out in 2018, ABC, Maryland Minority Contracts Association. We did have a meeting with the secretary on behalf of MMCA.
In 2018?
Looking at this was pre-filed. It was after it was drafted. I don't think any of our input is reflected in this draft. But we have a fundamental difference of opinion. They feel they need enhanced penalties. We believe that the bill already has a strong deterrent in it, all the way up to the department, $20,000 a violation, and requirements on the general contractor to inform subs, as well as joint and several liability for the payment of wages to employees. So we don't think the issue is making a bigger deterrent. We think it goes to Senator Hershey's point, working on education. And we also believe, if needed, we would and have always supported more resources for them to enforce the current statute. But just making this a more draconian, harder bill, that really doesn't get to where we want to go as an industry. It makes it harder, especially for our contractors, black contractors who want to step into this space as a general contractor. It's a very intimidating thing that an anonymous complaint can be filed, and now you're employing accountants and lawyers to defend yourself. And even if it's 2, 3 tiers down where you have no privity of contract, we spoke after I think the bill was drafted and dropped. We had no input into this bill, and nor did really ABC as an organization.
So you said no input, but you all spoke with the Secretary Wu.
Sure. We have a good relationship with the department. They're gracious. They're kind. We just weren't brought to the table in the drafting of the bill.
Okay, so the conversation was about sports or something?
No, we talked about the bill. We expressed our concerns. You know, one of the things we pointed out is, especially for our businesses, we're taking away MBE programs at the federal level. We've taken them away at the state level where there's federal dollars. We're struggling as an industry right now, and we would rather work with the department to try to help our existing companies to sustain, but not be discouraged from our growth. And I think that's what this bill does.
Okay, so one final point.
Yes.
So all the contractors, you need people to work the contracts, right? Yeah. You need those men and women with a hammer, with a saw and all the tools to get the job done. Yeah. But all of them love this bill. The unions, the people who support those men and women, I can see right here in their testimony, right? You heard it. And so basically, I mean, I'm just trying to understand that disconnect. I can talk to you offline. Maybe you can't.
It's not a disconnect. They don't represent 90% of the industry in the state. They're talking organized labor likes this bill. But workers and the companies in the state, we already have this in place. We have sufficient penalties in place and enforcement capabilities. They're making these cases. The Secretary is doing a great job.
Okay, all right, well, thank you. I'll leave it there. We can have another.
Let's see. Senator Guile?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if this is a question, maybe Sean will just go that way, since you're doing such a fine job as it is. We keep talking about the difference between a knowing violation and I guess a not know or maybe ignorance of the law type of violation. And I mean, I do think that there's a relatively high bar to establish a known violation. And I'm just wondering, and we've talked a lot about education, and sometimes contractors need to be educated on it. But I really do feel that like ignorance of the law is still no defense or no excuse. So maybe you can help me understand why is it that they don't know what the law says?
So it's interesting, when we drafted this bill, Secretary Perez, who would tell you he probably doesn't sit on the same side of the table as me often, we sat down and he recognized that the complex laws of the chair talked about, there are different definitions in the IRS, in the workplace classification law, in unemployment UI, as to what an employee is. And so it's easy for especially a lower tier contractor who's not terribly sophisticated to make a mistake. However, what we put in the law, and also we just did with the Department of Labor and organized labor last year as an incentive on prevailing wage contracts, was the obligation of a general contractor to inform in writing a subcontractor and down the line of their obligations under wage and hour laws. So frankly, I'm a former prosecutor. I wasn't a good one, but I could show a knowing violation with that affidavit that says, I understand the law, I know what we have to show, and now you take it to that evidence that we have, and you say to that subcontractor, you signed this, you acknowledge you understood the law, and you violated it. Okay, the presumption is problematic, I think, for that subcontractor. So we put that in place 18 years ago, and then we reiterated it last year in the procurement law that we sat and negotiated, where we took out joint and several liability, by the way, and said the general contractor has to inform the subcontractor on the site. And frankly, the subcontractor has to. And by the way, this bill doesn't go to the higher tier contractor. That was a misspeak. It goes to the general contractor, and we can get down several tiers. So I think that's the knowing violation. But these are complex issues that contractors can make a mistake. And look, frankly, the Department of Labor said 39 out of the 40 citations they issued ended up in an unknowing violation. It is a complex web of laws, and that's why all this emphasis on the punishment seems misplaced in the statute.
Okay. You mentioned something about incentives. This is my last question, I pinky promise. But you mentioned something about incentive. It's fair to say that there's a financial incentive to classify a worker as an independent contractor, or to, pay them under the table, or, there's an financial incentive there to misclassify.
But there's a deterrent up to $20,000 per employee.
Yeah.
And there's also a deterrent for the general contractor to allow it, because remember, they are held jointly and severally liable, whether it's a public works job or a private contract, for all unpaid wages and benefits. So the real incentive is overstated. Yeah, I guess a subcontractor who's struggling brings a guy and pays him under the table. I guess there's an incentive there. I actually looked at UI rates and unemployment rates in preparation. They're not that high. What is it, 2% on the first $8,000? It's for unemployment. On workers' comp, it's $1 on 100. If contractors understand how to do this and how to do it right, we're going to get a lot further with the remaining 3 or 4% they're violating. It's 6% by their own numbers that they released today.
All right. Well, thank you, Sean.
Yes,
thank you,
ma'am.
Madam Chair.
I'm going to weigh in just a minute here, because you mentioned workman's comp and UEF. Our UEF that's almost bankrupt because of employers that are not insuring their independent contractors. And that brings us to a whole nother issue. Senator Kramer, would you like to bring it home?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Madam Chair. I just have one quick question for the gentleman there at the podium. What is, for a single rep, your maximum bench? I gotta ask.
That was a bit unexpected. 405.
Whoa! Oh, thank you,
big brother.
Thank you for that. I'm not going to ask Mr. O'Halloran.
He looked like somebody that could stand for a couple of minutes. So, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 60. I'm sure we'll be talking more. And next, let's see, our next bill is Senate Bill 216, unemployment insurance confidentiality. And where's my witness list? 216. Deputy Secretary Jason Perkins Cohen.
Roll. Good afternoon, Chair Beidle, Vice Chair Hayes, members of the committee. My name is Jason Perkins Cohen. I am the Deputy Secretary at the Maryland Department of Labor. I'm here today to testify in support of Senate Bill 216. I'm a panel of one, a little different than the last panel. This bill is really trying to balance providing latitude so that we can share data with our sister agencies and other stakeholders as appropriate as the federal law allows, while also making sure that we have appropriate protections and safeguards to protect that data. Right now, Maryland does not have a clear, consistent framework for sharing unemployment insurance data. The rules are spread across different sections of law, and in some cases, they are more restrictive than the federal law requires. This lack of clarity makes it harder than it should be to share data responsibly, and Senate Bill 216 fixes that problem. First, it allows state agencies to work more efficiently by using the data the state already has. As you all know, the Division of Unemployment Insurance already collects information about work status and wages. And when other state or local agencies need that same information, it makes sense to share it securely. Makes more sense to share it securely than to have to build new systems, set up new portals, duplicate investigations, or ask people to submit the same information over and over again, which I know you all know how frustrating that can be. A good example of this is what happened when the bridge collapsed. The state appropriately wanted to set up some worker support programs. We got there eventually, but it was a clunky, time-consuming problem, and we can do a lot better by having this law in place so that we don't have to go through that clunky process and slow down important support for residents. Second, this bill strengthens data protections. It clearly defines what information is confidential, when it can be shared, and the rules that apply when it is shared. It also establishes penalties for misuse, both for the department employees and for third parties who receive data and disclose it improperly. That accountability is required under federal law, and it's critical to protecting privacy. So in closing, I ask for support of Senate Bill 216. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, and I don't see any questions. Thank you for your testimony. That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 216. Here's Senator Simon Ayer. We're going to hear, yep, right on time, and we're going to hear his Senate Bill 199. And you have, Senator, do you want to bring up Kirsten Bozak with you?
Sure.
She's your panel. Thank you.
Nice to see you all again. This won't be that long as the first bill I heard. I was watching, so. Anyway, Senator Brian Simon Ayer presenting Senate Bill 199. I worked with the Department of Disabilities, the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Veterans and Military Families, and advocates in drafting this consensus legislation. Recently, the General Assembly passed a bill to create the Individuals with Disabilities and Service Disabled Veterans Boating Fund. This program offers grant money to nonprofits who provide sailing, boating, kayaking, and similar things to those with disabilities and service-disabled veterans. So what this bill does, it allows an accompanied family member or a direct support professional of the individual with disabilities or a service-disabled veteran to also participate in the program. As you can imagine, many times a person with disabilities cannot participate in programs like this without their support person assisting them. Of course, without this bill, this would discourage a lot of people from participating, and that is exactly the opposite goal of the program. Therefore, it makes sense to allow a accompanying family member or a direct support professional to help those with disabilities so they can participate. That's the bill. And no fiscal note.
That's music to our ears. Kirsten, do you want to go ahead?
Good afternoon, Chair Beidel and Finance Committee. My name is Kirsten Bozak. I am the Director of Health and Behavioral Health at the Department of Disabilities. We have submitted a letter of support for this bill, and I'm primarily here to answer any questions you might have.
So do I have any questions for the sponsor, Kirsten, on Senate Bill 199? No, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Simon Ayer, for your leadership and your veterans advocacy and your bills. We're going to miss you when you're gone. But until then, I have a question for you. So this fund is already established, right? It's just adding a companion to get, I guess, the sponsorship for these activities.
Right. The fund is already established in law, and what this does is it sets up who's eligible to participate in it. So currently, those who are disabled or service disabled veteran can participate. This will allow them to have somebody accompany them, a family member or a support person, to allow them to help in kayaking or boating and allow them just to be part of that.
Yeah, so this fund comes from the state?
Yes.
And goes through which agency?
As a Department of Disabilities?
Yes.
Okay. And what kind of outreach do you provide to the disabled and the veteran community?
Well, let me just say first, this was just created. Senator Gazone was the lead sponsor in 2024. I'm not sure the funding has got there yet. I haven't seen this year's budget, but they allow up to, I think, $500,000, and each nonprofit can have a $40,000 grant. So I don't know about the outreach.
So yes, as of right now, the fund is currently unfunded.
Unfunded.
So we don't have any money allocations to offer yet. And as far as outreach, over the last year, we have worked on building out the structure for this program. There are organizations who are already providing these services, who they largely testified last year in support of this bill. And we will do outreach once that funding is live.
Okay. So the bill passed last year. It was not funded last year. So any money's going in this year? No?
Not as of now, no.
Okay. Okay. So we passed these really great bills, sounds really good, but we don't put money into it. And so it leaves us, especially in the disabled and veterans community, wondering, the commitment of the state to do it.
Well, I will
Is
say,
there, yes, Senator.
I will say, you had a great champion of the bill last year. It was Senator Gazzone, who's the chairman of B&T. So I'm sure he's going to be pushing for funding for the program that he was the lead sponsor on.
Should we rally our veterans community to call Senator Gazzone? Is that what you're saying?
I leave that to your wisdom.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ellis. I don't see any other questions. That ends the hearing. Thank you, Senator, for your patience. Next, we're going to hear from the Maryland Department of Disabilities, Senate Bill 22, Secretary Carol Beatty and Ann Blakefield.
Good afternoon, Chair Beidle and Vice Chair Hayes and the entire committee. Thank you for having us here. I'm Carol Beatty. I'm the Secretary for the Department of Disabilities. And we are here to introduce Senate Bill 22, which is the Department of Disabilities Housing Programs and Affiliated Foundations establishment on behalf of the department. And with me today is our Deputy Secretary, Ann Blackfield, who will address the amendment and help to answer any questions that the committee might have about the bill. So Senate Bill 22 has two core purposes that will help us to secure the future of our most vital work. First, this bill seeks to establish our department's current housing work in statute, in state statute. This affirms our deep and ongoing commitment with our partners at the Department of Housing and Community Development and the Maryland Department of Health in our work to increase stable, affordable, and accessible housing for Marylanders with disabilities. Second, and equally important, I think, is that this bill will allow the Department of Disabilities to establish one or more affiliated foundations. These foundations will be designed to support our critical programs in housing, assistive technology, and employment. So just a little bit of background. Our constituent service calls tell us, the data around them tell us that some of the most pressing issues for Marylanders with disabilities include housing and access to assistive technology and, of course, employment. And diversifying funding is urgently required for these programs to remain sustainable and to expand so that we may serve more individuals. Historically, these essential programs have relied heavily on federal funding. However, these funds are now often no longer available, or they've become much harder to obtain, or they are simply just not enough to keep pace with the rising costs and the growing need for program growth. So establishing a foundation or foundations has the potential to provide some flexibility and some flexible resources needed to fill these gaps. Maryland Department of Disabilities manages 5 housing programs and currently faces a wait list of approximately 4,000 people as of fiscal year 25. Our Maryland Assistive Technology Program is our longstanding assistive technology service, which this committee helped to formalize last year through Senate Bill 208. While TAP is 100% federally funded, the grant has not kept pace with the rising cost of this service or the need in the community. Furthermore, the ATL loan program, which provides low-interest loans for assistive technology and adaptive vehicles and home modifications, currently receives no state funding at all. And finally, the Office of Disability Employment Advancement and Policy, which we refer to as ODEP, was created last year by the General Assembly through the Governor's Model Employer Act, and we are actively seeking additional resources to advance the state as a model employer initiative. I want to emphasize that there's no fiscal note associated with Senate Bill 22, which is modeled on the structure of HB 717 for the Department of Natural Resources, which passed the legislature last year. MDOD will use existing staff for the initial setup, and we will fully expect the foundation to become self-sustaining. Importantly, the affiliated foundation will initially be operated by a board of volunteers, and MDOD will not be funding the foundation itself. So in conclusion, SB 22 is vital to secure the future of our department's most critical programs, and by establishing our housing work in state law and creating a flexible foundation to pursue diverse funding, we can expand and support the work of our department to support Marylanders with disabilities for years to come. Thank you for your consideration of this legislation, and I respectfully request a favorable report for Senate Bill 22. Deputy Secretary?
Thank you, Chair Beidel. Thank you to the committee. I do want to echo something that the Secretary said, which is that we did model SB 22 off of the language that was used in HB 717, which established the Department of Natural Resources Affiliated Foundation last year, which I think itself is modeled on other statutes that set up affiliated foundations. I'd like to thank our colleagues at DNR who walked us through the bill. I would also like to thank the State Ethics Commission and the Attorney General, who also reviewed the ethics and legal provisions with us, just to see, again, if they're still comfortable with the language. From the conversation with the Attorney General, we did decide that we would put in a sponsor amendment, which should be in your file. It's a very minor amendment. It adds the phrase "office of" before the Attorney General, and that is just to clarify that we expect that the Office of the Attorney General, as represented by our AAG, will be reviewing any policies or other documents related to the affiliated foundation, not Attorney General Brown himself or a proxy. So we just wanted to make sure that language was clear. So the sponsor amendment is before you. I also respectfully request a favorable report with that amendment in it. Thank you. And I'm also available to answer any questions. That concludes my testimony.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the Secretary or Ann? I don't see any questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 22. Now we have Senate Bill 113. Secretary Rokes, Deputy Secretary Jimmy Anderson, Jennifer Crawley, Liz Woodward, and Sarah Westrick. And it's Human Services Department of Agent and Commission on Aging, the Longevity Ready Maryland Act. Thank you.
I was going to say good afternoon, Chair Beidel, but good afternoon, Vice Chair Hayes and members of the Finance Committee. I am so very pleased to be with you this afternoon. My name is Carmel Roque, and I'm the Secretary of the Maryland Department on Aging. I'm here today in support of our departmental bill, SB 113, the Longevity Ready Maryland Act. You have a written testimony, and as you remember, last week I was here with you discussing the Longevity Ready Maryland Plan. This landmark legislation permanently enshrines the importance of planning for our growing older adult population. Aging is a biological and deeply personal experience. Aging is also a population phenomenon. The population collectively ages as individuals live longer lives. In the world, in our nation, and in Maryland, we are in the midst of a massive population disruption caused by living longer. We have a society that's built around retirement at 65, among other things, but many of us can live up to 3 decades after that age, and fully half of today's 5-year-olds can expect to live to be 100. The norms, and I like to say the norm really is ageism, the systems, the policies, the laws, the programs of our last century are not sufficient to meet today's longer-lived society. 2 years ago, the governor issued an executive order for Maryland to begin this planning work. In July of this year, the governor signed the Longevity Ready Maryland Multi-Sector State Plan for Aging. As you remember, there are over 70 specific recommendations in our Longevity Ready Maryland Plan, which is incorporated by reference into the bill under our 4 overarching goals for our work: building a longevity ecosystem, promoting economic opportunity, preparing state residents to afford longer lives, and optimizing health, wellness, and mobility. This bill, importantly, is not about a Department of Aging plan. We do have one of those. We're mandated to have one of those. This bill is about the approved state multi-sector plan that commits the state to using the lens of longevity when considering planning policy, legislation, and advocacy. This bill, very importantly, does not commit the state to current or future new costs. We are at an inflection point here in Maryland. In 4 years, a quarter of Maryland's population will be over the age of 60. More than a third is already over the age of 50. This bill is very important in that it's a next step to modernizing and updating the role of the Department on Aging to lead, guide, and support the multi-sector state approach to preparing for longer lives. The 10-year multi-sector plan and the bill are very heavily informed by our over 2-year stakeholder engagement. We have been intentional and consistent in engaging with our 19 local area agencies on aging, our sister agencies, and key external stakeholders. The department has agreed to the amendments you have in your written testimony that are a direct result of that engagement. We also propose the bill proposes a modest expansion and realignment of the Commission on Aging's membership. So we'll grow. The commission will become slightly larger, and the membership will be slightly expanded. We also propose comprehensive updates to the full Longevity Ready Maryland plan every 4 years, while giving our successors reasonable flexibility to make changes to the objectives and strategies in the future. This is intended for the plan itself to be a dynamic plan and to reflect current changes in the environment. To briefly address our sponsor amendments, they are as follows. Commit the department to its current practice, maintaining a publicly accessible Longevity Ready Maryland plan implementation progress tracker on our website. Increase representation from area agencies on aging on the Commission on Aging from no seats on the commission to 3, recognizing their significance and importance in providing care and services to older people in Maryland. Adding a dedicated seat for a veteran with interest in Longevity Ready Maryland to the Commission on Aging at the suggestion of our friends at the Department of Veterans and Military Affairs. And some clarifying language from the recent federal final rule under the Older Americans Act that informs our state plan on aging. Our goal here and in the entire bill is to be clear as possible about the role of the agency going forward. The Longevity Ready Maryland Act puts Maryland at the forefront and makes a commitment to the multi-sector on Aging framework to address the challenges and maximize the benefits of the great blessing of longer lives. And very personally, I will say, after almost 50 years, with an emphasis on caring for older people, their families, and their care providers, this is a very joyful moment for me to be able to bring this bill before you. With that, I request a favorable with amendments report for Senate Bill 113, the Longevity Ready Maryland Act, and would be glad to answer any questions you have.
Or are you just there for questions, or is everyone going to speak?
We're here as a resource for questions.
Okay.
We have
Right. Well, good afternoon, Chair Beidel, Vice Chair Hayes, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jimmy Anderson, and I serve as Deputy Secretary of Veterans Affairs Operations at the Department of Veterans and Military Families. I show up today as a post-9/11 veteran that has served for over 16 years in the Air Force, and I continue to serve in the Air Force Reserve to this day. I'm also a proud District 20 resident, and I plan to age here. I'm here today to offer our department strong support for Senate Bill 113, the Longevity Ready Maryland Act. The Department of Aging's departmental bill represents a fundamental shift in how Maryland prepares for its future. For my department, this isn't an aging policy. It is a promise to our veterans that our final chapters will be written with the same dignity and support they earned in the first chapters of service. Maryland is home to over 360,000 veterans, and our population is aging. At DVMF, we see this firsthand every day at Charlotte Hall Veterans Home, where we provide a continuum of care for hundreds of residents who require skilled nursing and assisted living. The data from VA's National Center for Veterans Analysis and Statistics is clear. 41% of Maryland's veterans, nearly 150,000, are already age 65 or older. And by 2030, this segment will surge as our Vietnam-era veterans, who make up over 32% of our population, continue to age. DVMF looks forward to collaborating with the Department of Aging to integrate the needs of veterans into their multi-sector Longevity Ready Maryland plan. And by integrating the needs of veterans into the plan, Maryland will build a more inclusive system. Furthermore, we strongly support updating the Commission on Aging membership to include a designated veteran, ensuring that the lived experience of Maryland's 360,000 veterans and their families is present at the highest levels of policy and advocacy. On behalf of the Maryland Department of Veterans and Military Families, I respectfully ask for a favorable report with amendments on Senate Bill 113. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you for your service.
Good afternoon, Chair Beidel and members of the Senate Finance Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Sarah Westrick. I'm the Advocacy Director for AARP Maryland. AARP Maryland proudly supports Senate Bill 113, the Longevity Ready Maryland Act. AARP Maryland welcomed the launch of the Longevity Ready Maryland initiative in January 2024 and served as a key stakeholder in the plan's development. This comprehensive 10-year multi-sector plan aligns state, local, nonprofit, and private partners to strengthen aging services in Maryland. The plan also aligns with AARP's mission to empower people to live their best life as they age. This bill provides the leadership and structure necessary to move this work forward. It strengthens the role of the Secretary of Aging, modernizes and diversifies the Commission on Aging to better reflect Maryland's communities, and increases its transparency through annual reporting to the Governor and General Assembly. The bill also ensures that the Longevity Ready Maryland Plan is updated regularly to stay responsive to changing needs and best practices. Age-friendly planning benefits everyone. When we design communities with safe streets, accessible housing, reliable transportation, and opportunities for connection and lifelong learning, people of all ages benefit. This legislation is about more than aging. It is about shaping a Maryland where every person at every stage of life can thrive. With that in mind, AERP Maryland urges a favorable report on SB 113 so we can build a stronger, more equitable, and more age-friendly Maryland for everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you, Sarah. Is anyone else going to speak? No. Senator Ellis?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, everyone, for your testimony, Madam Secretary. Mr. Deputy Secretary, fellow Air Force veteran.
Yes.
I, too, want to thank you for your service.
There we go.
Appreciate you. Good to see you in this role. So Southern Maryland has more veterans proportionally than any other part of the state, Maryland. And we have less services there, especially in Charles County, than any other part of the state. And my job always is to bring Annapolis back to Charles County, because somehow we tend to, up here, forget about, places that are far away and hard to get to. And so I just want to say that Charles County is working, Madam Secretary, and we met before in my office and your testimony last week, very much interested in what you're doing. And Charles County is working on a similar issue with our health, health director, health officer. Thank you, sir. And I just want to know about the coordination with the county, basically bringing Annapolis home to where all our constituents are. Are you working with the counties to coordinate efforts, or is that overlap? Because they ask us to provide $3 million for a similar program to develop that program. So why should we spend extra money with the county when basically we should be working statewide and working with our locals to bring these programs into our districts? So my question is, are you planning outreach to all our counties? I noticed in the testimony the counties didn't weigh in on this, and that's my question.
Well, thank you for the question. And I have been to beautiful Charles County and enjoyed it a couple of times now in my role as secretary, which has been a wonderful experience. I think you raise a really good question, because part of what we're trying to help folks understand is that this is a statewide plan that is focused on having all of the state government agencies coordinate the work that they do in ways that will benefit people living longer lives here in Maryland, as well as it is not specifically structured so that we are going to be receiving funding and distributing it to the locals. We already have that as a core responsibility for the agency. We do that with federal funds that come into the state. We are the state unit designated to receive federal funds and disperse them to the 19 area agencies on aging, and we also do that for state funds. This bill is really about coordinating across the state government and multi-sectors. Now, will it include our local county governments and our nonprofit area agencies on aging? It already has, because they've been very, God bless you, they've been very much a part of our stakeholder engagement. And they already have been instrumental, of course, as they are every 4 years, in developing the 4-year Maryland State Plan on Aging, which is incorporated into the multi-sector plan. So we have made it a central part of the work that we're doing to ensure that the existing network, their feedback, their concerns, and their ability actually to reach into their local communities to identify what the needs and the opportunities are, that's an open door and that information flows.
Yeah, thank you. And so with that, I know Ms. Sarah Westrick, you mentioned sidewalks and stuff like that, basically walkable communities. And I know that's an issue that we're facing a lot of. Every year for the last 4 years, I've had bill on sidewalks up here, because areas like Charles County, they build it for people who have cars. So you have all these 55-plus communities. I mean, there's nowhere for them to walk out of their community, right? And so, walk and exercise is one of the best exercise, minus days like now with ice on the sidewalks, right? But the best exercise. So sidewalks and in the plan, basically that's what I'm kind of referring to a granular level, working with our local counties to basically develop those issues, working with MDOT, Maryland Department, who has a special fund for sidewalks I've discovered, and they're working with my county now to develop that. But that kind of level of coordination with the counties, with the state agencies who have money for these programs, but a lot of the locals don't have the people to ask you or to come investigate the state, where is the money, right? So that kind of coordination with each county, especially my county, to really make sure they know what's going on, where the resources are. That's my concern.
I'm going to just turn to you, Liz.
Yeah, so that is such a fantastic example of what we're trying to do with Longevity Ready Maryland, and something that we've already had some great partnerships with AARP and the Department of Transportation around. So what you're talking about is a piece of a much larger complete streets policy. And as you may be aware, that's a huge focus right now of the Department of Transportation. They have a variety of different initiatives that make up their complete streets policy. And they have a lot of different funding sources for that, funding sources that do not come to an area agency on aging or other parts of human services, for example. And when we are able to do something like Longevity Ready Maryland at the state level and coordinate with partners like AARP and local transit offices, we make sure that older adults are part of that conversation. So recently, the Department of Transportation, AARP, and the Department of Aging participated in what they call a MOVE roundtable in 2 communities to bring partners together. And because of Longevity Ready Maryland, we were asked to come to the table and help identify partners that should be there, which include local commissions on aging, local interagency councils on aging, to make sure that those issues are being elevated and that people are coming to the table and are part of the solutions. And that means coordinating all of those resources with stakeholder input. So it's a really good question. It's a really great example of implementation that's already happening in association with this plan and with other state resources.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I don't see any other questions. We do have Ann Seacott for favorable with amendment. You're all done. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Ann Seacott. I'm testifying today on behalf of the Maryland Area Agencies on Aging. We're known as M4A. And we are testifying in very strong support of this bill and asking for one amendment. We absolutely support the codification of Longevity Ready Maryland, and we believe that this has been a really wonderful effort by this administration, by this secretary, the entire department on this multi-sector planning. And we believe it is right to put it in statute so that it continues, beyond this administration. We support the effort we appreciate that the department is accepting an amendment to increase the representation of AAAs on the Aging Commission. And we think that that's a really wonderful way to make sure the locals are participating with that body as well. We do urge you to consider adopting an additional amendment that goes to the points that were just discussed here about local planning. We know the needs of adults in different parts of the state. We know the resources available in different parts of the state are all different. And so just as you've heard that this secretary in this first Longevity Ready Maryland process has absolutely included locals and stakeholders, we want to make sure that is also enshrined so that, again, future administrations who are continuing with this multi-sector planning also continue to include the local plans. So with that amendment, we ask you to take a look at, and we absolutely support this legislation.
And thank you for submitting the amendment in writing. We do appreciate that. Any
Absolutely.
questions for Ms. Seacott? I don't see any. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
And then we have Aaron Greenfield virtually favorable.
Madam Chair, did you point to me? Your audio went on mute.
We can hear you, but if you can speak up a little louder.
I can't hear you. I assume you're...
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. My apologies. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Aaron Greenfield here on behalf of Leading Age Maryland in support of Senate Bill 113. Leading Age Maryland played an active role in the development of the draft plan and fully supports codifying this important work into state law. According to the 2025 Maryland State Housing Needs Assessment, Maryland has 1.4 million Marylanders age 60 and older in 2025, and 1 in 4 expected to reach that age by 2030. The state faces both opportunities and challenges across housing, health, economic security, caregiving, and community engagement. This bill promotes the integration of services, streamlines access to supports, and prioritizes affordable, accessible housing and home and community-based care, which will help Marylanders remain in their communities as they age. We urge a favorable report on Senate Bill 113, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Do I have any questions from the committee? I don't see any questions. Thank you for your testimony. And that ends the hearing on that bill, on Senate Bill 113. Thank you. All right, so next we have our Maryland Insurance Commissioner, Marie Grant. She has 5 bills with us today. 5 bills. She did not bring a lot of witnesses. Thank you very much. Good
Thank you.
afternoon. And
Good
this
afternoon.
is Patricia Dorn with you?
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, committee members. Hopefully the bills will go quickly today. Our first bill is a relatively easy bill, I think, Senate Bill 14, Health Insurance Small Business Health Options Program Enrollment Effective Dates. What we are doing with this bill right now in Maryland law is it explicitly states that if a SHOP enrollee wants to enroll after the 15th of the month, their coverage can't take effect until the second month following. That's not what federal regulations say. We want to address that discrepancy. It's better for consumers if at any time in the month they can enroll in the following month. So that's all the bill does. Happy to answer any questions.
Sounds great. Thank you. Anything we can do to help people get health insurance, right? So Patricia, you're just here for questions. I don't see any questions from the committee. Thank you very much. That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 14. Now, Madam Commissioner, Senate Bill 134, Medicare supplement policies.
Yep. So thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 134, Medicare supplement policies, is a bill that allows for 2 discrete special enrollment periods without medical underwriting for situations that face consumers in our state. So Medicare supplement plans are states that the design is set at the federal level, but we as a state regulator regulate the plans. We see the forms, we set the rates, we see the market. And Patty Dorn, who's here with me today, is our Associate Commissioner for Consumer Education and Advocacy. This bill is a direct reflection of things and conversations that Associate Commissioner Dorn sees every day in her work. So the first of 2 special enrollment periods in this bill is a guaranteed issue right for folks who are dually eligible for Medicaid and Medicare, but may, for whatever reason, have a change in income that results in the loss of their coverage for Medicaid. This would get them a special enrollment period without underwriting for Medicare supplement policies, which might make sense for that person in that time. So it's a narrow situation, but it's very important. It was actually something we allowed in the public health emergency. That provision of law sunset, we're looking to make it permanent. That's the first portion of the bill. The second portion of the bill, and I'm going to rely a little bit in case there's questions that are too deep, is about newly created plans by the federal government that folks who were born or became eligible before January 1, 2020, don't currently have access to immediately without underwriting. Those folks can still get those plans. What they do is go through the birthday rule that you all passed several years ago. So the risk is priced into the plans of people switching, but we're definitely seeing cases where folks want to enroll in the plans and they have to wait for that birthday rule to switch. And so again, this is addressing that narrow situation and allowing for consumer ease of enrollment into particular Medicare supplement plans. So that concludes my testimony, Madam Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions or defer them to Associate Commissioner Doyle.
I do see all favorable testimony written, so any questions for Senate Bill 134? See no questions. That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 134. Now we're going to go to Senate Bill 52, and Joy Hatchett is on virtually if we have questions, as well as our commissioner, so thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, committee members. Senate Bill 154, Property Insurance Settlement of Claims and Notices, addresses two situations that we have seen impacting consumers during my time as commissioner, and Deputy Commissioner Hatchett, who is also serving as acting commissioner of PNC, can talk in some more detail about some of the things that we've been seeing. The first provision of this bill is a provision that prohibits an insurer when adjusting and settling a first-party claim under a residential or commercial property insurance policy based on the actual cash value of property from depreciating the expenses for labor. So what that means is that in a lot of different insurance policies, the actual cash value of a property often decreases over time. Property decreases over time. But the costs to fix the property do not go down. In fact, often they go up. And so we've seen a concerning practice where built into policy forms, or otherwise, there are examples of insurers of depreciating the costs of labor. We actually put a draft bulletin out for comment on this issue because we saw this as a consumer protection issue. We received a lot of feedback from industry that this was not within the current authority of the Maryland Insurance Administration. And so that is why we are pursuing that provision of the bill. The second provision of the bill is about clear notices to homeowners when the provisions of their policies change. We've received complaints from consumers who didn't receive explicit notice that their insurer had reduced coverage or increased deductibles upon renewal of their homeowners or renters policy. Many complainants didn't learn about that until a covered loss occurred and were caught off guard by the fact that the loss was not fully covered and that the policy coverage was different than what they expected. So this bill would require explicit notice of any reduction in coverage or increase in deductibles under a renewal policy before the renewal term, to make sure that our consumers are aware of and have an opportunity to address potential coverage gaps resulting from these changes. We are aware that there are many suggested amendments from industry. We've just received those. We are happy to take a look at those and work with industry and see if we can reach some agreement. I will say, particularly on the issue of depreciation of labor, some of that will ultimately be a policy call. I've seen amendments that instead of prohibiting the practice would instead require clearer notice. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and Deputy Commissioner Hatchett is also available for questions.
I don't see any questions.
Okay.
We do have one favorable amendment and one unfavorable, so. So Bryson Popham and Nancy Egan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bryson Popham on behalf of the Maryland Association of Mutual Insurance Companies and the insurance agents and brokers. I'm the one in opposition. Nancy and I flipped the coin. She wanted to go first, so I'd like to let her do that, if I may.
We did. There we go. I guess I just lost the coin toss. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nancy Egan. I'm with the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. We have examined the bill, and we see a lot of drafting errors that need clarification and a lot of concerns on the behalf of my member companies. One of the, there's two parts of the bill. One of them is explicit disclosure language. One of the first things that we were concerned about is there's already a regulation, in fact, in COMAR that requires companies to provide clear, explicit notice when there's any reduction in coverage or a coverage is no longer there, or if there's been a change in deductible. One of our questions for the MIA, which we work together on a regular basis, and we're glad that we're having the chance to talk about our amendments, is that these complaints that came forward, why weren't they already being handled under this section of the COMAR, which already requires such notice? The other section of the bill that we're concerning about is making actual cash value policies actually replacement cost in many ways, because they're not depreciating the labor. If you look at my testimony on page 3, we have an example of a claim where a company would be looking at a roof that needs to be replaced. $10,000 for the roof. I think it's $6,000 for the actual material, $4,000 for the labor. If you look at it, the difference in the calculations, there's a difference of quite a lot between doing the depreciation the way the commissioner would prefer to what we are doing actually in practice. So if you think about it, there's a difference of $6,000, I think, $400 versus $2,000. I may have that wrong. Oops, sorry. I think that's me. I didn't get to finish, so I just wanted to point out just one more thing. The fiscal note says that there would not be any impact. Anytime that we're going to have to pay more out on a claim, it's going to impact rates, and we're talking about affordability. I know that my members were not contacted about what the impact would be on this bill if it should go through, but we do know that if you're going to change the current practice of ACV, this is only going to raise rates for everyone that would be impacted by this coverage. Thank you.
Nancy, is this on ACV policies or also on full replacement cost policies?
It's on both, and understanding that when you have a replacement cost policy, there's a process that people go through. We have found that over the years, when you have replacement cost coverage, 30% of policyholders don't make the repairs. So when we first start out with a claim, we're going to pay ACV until you actually replace the policy. So we do a calculation giving you the ACV value, and then later on, as you go through a claim, we pay the replacement costs. Now, for large claims, we work with the consumer and their contractor to make sure there's partial payments as we go along. But we want to make sure that there's enough money for the down payment for a contractor. Most contractors take a small amount up front and then work forward from there. So I know there was something in the MIA testimony about the financial impact on a consumer during a claim process, but the amount that is paid for the ACV helps them to initiate the start of doing the repairs. Then if they don't do the repairs, they've just gotten the ACV value. And I hope that if anybody has any questions about that claim process, please let me know. Thank you.
Let's hear from Bryson, and then we'll see.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Bryson Popham for MAMIC and IANB. In respectful opposition to this bill, I'm always reluctant to oppose a bill requested by a regulator for obvious reasons, but especially one like Ms. Grant, whom I respect greatly. Let's talk about what this applies to. Okay, it is First of all, these could be homes. People could live in them, owner occupied, but they could also be vacation homes, vacant homes, seasonal homes, secondary homes. One common theme is that they're often older homes, and that is why ACV is often chosen. We have 125 companies in Maryland licensed to write homeowners insurance. I don't know how many more can write other types of insurance, and they are all kinds of ages, all kinds of conditions. And what this bill would do is require all of those when there is a first-party property loss to calculate the labor portion of that on a replacement cost basis. Some people just don't want it. And in fact, what it's going to do in an age when affordability is key is it's going to make the product more expensive, not less expensive. So you'll be in the anomalous position of requiring some people who don't want to change to have to pay more to get the changes required in this bill. I'd also like to point out on page 2, lines 25 through 27, there's a bit of a head scratcher for me anyway. On line 25, it specifies the labor rate, but it doesn't define the labor rate. So my question is, what is the labor rate? How is it calculated? If there is a violation under this, and by the way, it creates a new Unfair Claims Settlement Practice Act, this bill does, how would the labor rate be determined? It's just not clear. Secondly, if you look at lines 26 and 27, there is a term profit fee. I don't know what that term means either. So the bill would need a lot of work. We're happy to work with the committee on appropriate disclosures so consumers know what they're buying. I think that would be a good thing to do. And for that reason, we would respectfully request an unfavorable report with an amendment.
Thank you, Bryson. Do I have any questions for Nancy or Bryson? I don't see any questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
That ends the hearing on Senate Bill 52. And our insurance commissioner is back for Senate Bill 139, Insurance Third-Party Administrators Enforcement.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, committee members. Senate Bill 139, Insurance Third-Party Administrators Enforcement, closes an important gap in Maryland law related to third-party administrators, or TPAs. So TPAs are entities that are authorized to manage premiums and handle claims on behalf of insurers or plan sponsors, and they have to register with the MIA, and there's a specific title in the code or subtitle that relates to TPAs. What this bill does is it gives us broader authority to discipline TPAs who break state insurance law as part of their practice. And there's some specific examples that have troubled us. That's the reason we're seeking this bill. So we've been pursuing unauthorized health insurance entities operating within the state. Typically, they do that with the assistance of a TPA or a broker. Right now, we can and do take an aggressive approach against the authorized insurer themselves. We can take aggressive enforcement positions against the broker who is selling the insurance, but we cannot take an aggressive stance against the TPA who might be involved in this transaction. So this bill closes the gap by allowing us to suspend or revoke the registration of TPAs for a violation of any provision of the insurance article. It also allows us to impose a civil penalty of up to $10,000 for each violation for a TPA for violating the insurance article. Right now, those penalties provisions are only for things in the TPA subtitle, which is really a registration and reporting subtitle. So that's what the bill does. It closes an important loophole. I understand Dana Kaufman was signed up to testify, couldn't make it, but she was in strong support of this bill on behalf of Meg Kai. Happy to answer any questions.
Senator Ellis.
Chair, a quick question. Thank you, Commissioner Grant. Great bills. So with the penalties proposed in this bill, sometimes agencies just put on a penalty and there's no really framework for appeal. Is there any framework for appeal, or without them have to spend a lot of money on lawyers, go to court right away?
Yeah, absolutely. And Mary Quay, who's our Associate Commissioner for Market Regulation and Producer Enforcement, can definitely comment on this as well. But with TPAs and what we do with brokers as well as insurers, we often first try to seek consent, like agreement, essentially, that someone violated the law, and try to work with them on a compliance plan, which is really the most important thing. We want to get folks to compliance. And then any penalty. As acts become more egregious, then there might be higher penalties or discussion of revocation of a license or registration. But all of the actions that we take are subject to hearing. So there is an internal hearing process that happens. And of course, if folks don't agree with those, they can then be appealed out to the courts.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, that ends the hearing on Senate Bill 139 because our other virtual witness is not there. So now the last bill, Senate Bill 205, Health Insurance, Mental Health and Substance Use Disorders, Codification of Federal Requirements. And again, we have our Insurance Commissioner, Marie Grant.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. Senate Bill 205 is a very important bill that it tightens requirements relating to our enforcement of mental health parity in the state. So since 2008, we've had a federal law on the books and state enforcement requiring our insurers to offer mental health and substance use disorder benefits on the same basis that they offer physical health benefits. And there's quantitative treatment limitations like copays or deductibles that can't be different, but then there's non-quantitative treatment limitations that also cannot be different. And those are things like provider reimbursement, network structure, addressing provider shortages, formulary design. Those are some examples of the non-quantitative treatment limitations, or NQTLs, that we're seeking to enforce. Our team, over the spring and summer, took a good look at 2024 regulations from the federal government to figure out how we could best improve our law here in Maryland and improve enforcement. Over the course of that time, the Trump administration also announced that they did not plan to enforce those 2024 regulations. And so what our bill does is it takes the approach that we are codifying certain definitions and certain protections directly into Maryland law. Specifically, that includes definitions of mental health conditions and substance use disorders that are consistent with best standards in medical practice. It prohibits the use of discriminatory factors and evidentiary standards in the design of those NQTLs. It requires our insurers to collect, evaluate, and act on relevant outcomes data for NQTLs, and frankly strengthens our data requirements that are on the books, and also requires our insurers to offer meaningful benefits for mental health and substance use disorder on par with benefits for medical surgical services. So this bill allows us to preserve the advances toward parity that we've all made together in access to care for mental health and substance use disorder patients in Maryland. It strengthens our enforcement ability, helps us fill in the statutory gaps that exist, and will allow essentially, this is critically important because it allows us to ensure that insurers are offering benefits that are required under federal law for our Maryland consumers. So this is a complicated bill. I'm happy to answer any questions. I believe Associate Commissioner Quay is also on the line for any questions that may come up as well. Thank you.
I don't see any questions. You have 7 people virtually, 2 in person, Dan Martin and Ann Seacott, if they want to come up. And then we have 5 virtually. So I don't see any questions.
Doesn't matter. I'm happy to go. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Again, I'm Ann Seacott with Public Policy Partners. We actually have a number of clients that are very supportive of Senate Bill 205. We're very grateful to the commissioner for bringing the bill forward. We know that there are rules that are in place at the federal level that are either not being enforced or threatened in some way, and we think it is very important to make sure that the state codifies those requirements. You all have over the years done a lot of work in this area, and we are very grateful for the work that you've done. This is another step we think we need to make sure is protected for Marylanders in order to access the substance use disorder and mental health services that they need. So we ask you to support the bill, and we're available for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Dan Martin, with the Mental Health Association of Maryland, here in strong support of Senate Bill 205. And I just want to thank Commissioner Grant and the whole team at MIA for all the work that they've done on this issue, and thank you all on the committee, too, for the steps that you've taken over the years to ensure parity in the state of Maryland. You know, MIA is really putting in the time to work closely with the carriers to make sure that their parity obligations are clear and really support them in meeting their requirements under the law. And, you know, because of all that work, we're making progress. I'm really happy to say that we're making progress, but we're not out of the woods yet. Marylanders with commercial insurance still face enormous barriers in accessing mental health and substance use disorder care in network. And so, you know, we just really want to keep up the good work. There's a lot of concern about kind of an erosion at the federal level of consumer protections and anti-discrimination requirements. And so this would make sure that we're doing what we can in Maryland to protect Maryland consumers and make sure that they have access to the services that they need. So urge your support, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for hanging in there. It's 5 o'clock. You did good. We have Shannon Hall virtually first. Shannon, will you unmute?
I'm here. Thank you very much, Chairman Idle. I'm Shannon Hall. I'm Executive Director of the Community Behavioral Health Association of Maryland. On behalf of the 95 mental health and substance use treatment providers that we represent, I'll simply say me too. We're pleased to support this bill and urge your favorable report.
Thank you, Shannon. You just got a big gold star for being brief. David Lloyd.
Thank you, Chair Beidel, Vice Chair Hayes, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is David Lloyd, Chief Policy Officer at Inseparable. We're a national nonprofit organization that works to close the treatment gap for people with mental health and substance use conditions. We strongly support Senate Bill 205 and thank the Maryland Insurance Administration for requesting this important bill that codifies key protections from the 2024 mental health parity rule into Maryland law. We're grateful for MIA's ongoing work to enforce parity in Maryland, and this bill is really important for a simple reason, because even though parity has been the law for more than 15 years, the promise of parity has not yet been fully realized for many families, and people are told that mental health and substance use disorder care is covered, yet insurers are still not fully in compliance, in large part given the inadequacies of longstanding parity rules. So Senate Bill 205 closes these gaps to make parity work for Maryland families in the ways that Commissioner Grant has already outlined. So we strongly support Senate Bill 205 and urge a favorable report. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Deborah Steinberg.
Hi, thank you, Chair Beidel and members of the Senate Finance Committee. I'm Deb Steinberg with the Legal Action Center. We facilitate the Maryland Parity Coalition, and we fully support SB 205. And in the interest of time, I have written testimony that I've submitted, and we urge a favorable report. And if you have any questions about the federal regulations that are being codified, we'd be happy to answer those. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Laura Willing.
Hi, good afternoon. Chair Beidel, Vice Chair Hayes, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony in strong support of Senate Bill 205. My name is Laura Willing, and I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist and the medical director for mental health policy and advocacy for the Community Mental Health Corps at Children's National Hospital. Many children and teens in Maryland are struggling to access appropriate mental health care. They wait on months-long wait lists to access care, and their parents and families often struggle for months or years to find appropriate evaluation, management, and therapeutic services. Even in my own clinical practice, which means that the child already sees a child psychiatrist, many families are spending months to over a year looking for in-network individual therapy, neuropsychological testing, or higher levels of care, such as partial hospitalization programs. Specifically, they are struggling to find an appropriate mental health provider who is in network with their insurance plan. As a state, we should ensure that mental health care is treated the same as medical surgical care and that our youth are able to receive the important and life-saving care they deserve. In alignment with federal law, this bill would codify federal protections so that Marylanders will have equitable access to mental health and substance use care across the continuum of care. Requiring health plans to collect, evaluate, and explain data to assess the impact on the access to mental health care is an important first step in determining if there is mental health parity in the health plan. This bill will update outdated policies that create separate standards for mental health and substance use treatment options by prohibiting the use of discriminatory evidence by which they are currently designed treatment limitations. This aligns with the Behavioral Health Administration's strategic plan, which aims to establish equitable access to care by dismantling silos that provide gaps in service. In addition, this bill would clarify MIA's authority to enforce parity protections based on state regulations in addition to the federal law. This is important because my patients in Maryland need mental health parity enforcement in order to access the quality mental health care they deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Do I have any questions for any of the favorable testimony? No questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That ends this hearing and ends our day. Thank you very much.